Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching fourth and final part of What If Naruto was raised by Raikage and built a new clan. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
In the afternoon, the Chunin guards glanced up as the two shinobi approached the gates and said, Ariki-san, your teammate Gifu Mitoku was hurt when he and Neji fought against Kitamaru. You'd want to know, Hokage. Sama said. Naruto gave a single nod before vanishing with a spark of static electricity. As Kakashi entered Konoha, he took his copy of Icha Icha out of his pouch. Tsunade was due for surgery with Akamichi Choji, so he shouldn't have to see her for a while, and if she left early, well, he had a reputation to maintain. The people of a shinobi village accustomed to such spectacles were not even put off by Naruto's use of Sunshin when he reappeared in the main lobby of Konoha's hospital. He wasted little time in passing by the receptionist's desk and saying, I was told that one of my teammates was hospitalized after his fight. Yeah. Right now, Gifu Mitoku is in room 724. Since his injuries are not thought to be life-threatening, Rin.san is operating on him right now to make sure he fully recovers. I want to remind you not to use a Sunshin to move around the hospital because the precise chakra control required for the majority of medical ninja operations can be interfered with by the fluctuations in the chakras. Yeah, I know, Naruto said, dismissively waving his hand as he started to ascend the stairs. It's not the first time I've been in a hospital. He took the stairs two at a time, quickly ascending to the 7th floor. He wasn't terribly surprised to see Yugito standing outside of the room Mitoku was being treated in. She had started her fighting shortly before him, so it only made sense that she would have arrived in Konoha shortly before him too. And she'd obviously been directed to the hospital as well. How is he? Rin.san informed me that he had sustained a mild concussion, several cracked ribs, and significant damage to one of his upper leg muscles prior to her going in to operate. After our fight with Gaara, he's a little bruised, but not nearly as badly as either of us. However, in reference to Sanagakure Genin, one of them stopped by your fight. How were you aware? Gaara met up with me and fought Kimimaro so I could go after Sasuke. There was no Kimimaro when we left. You better fill me in. For the next 15 minutes or so, the two spent catching up on each other's lives since their breakup. Toward the end of their conversation, they felt someone approaching, who they knew was there because of the demonic chakra traces that were visible in him. They turned to see Sabaku no Gaara walk around the corner. Although he had been helpful during the last mission, Naruto had shown himself to be downright bloodthirsty in the past. Perhaps he had changed, but Naruto didn't know, and the idea of being with the insane and homicidal Gaara he'd seen during the Chunin exams wasn't a pleasant one. He moved instinctively, imposing himself between Yugito and Gaara as he eyed the Jinchuriki warily. After a prolonged period of silence during which the Suna Nin's apathetic gaze met the Kumo Nin's cautious gaze, Gaara finally broke the ice by saying, You seem wary of me. You almost cost Yugito-chan her life. After a little more staring, Gaara said, I might have saved yours. You did help me on that last mission, Naruto said after a lengthy silence. I'd give my life for hers in an instant. However, it was only a mission. Shinobi's behavior on a mission can differ greatly from their normal behavior. And I believe I have every reason to be concerned based on what I know about you in your day-to-day activities. I'm here for that reason. You changed when I was fighting the two of you, following my victory over Yugito. You increased your risk taking and recklessness. You endanger your life for someone else even more. Compared to everything I've known, this is different. As he collected his thoughts, Naruto said, You mentioned that you grew up living only for yourself. Yes. My father attempted to have me killed because my family feared me. I was supposed to protect the village, and they hated me. I therefore needed to discover my own motivation for fighting and for living. I therefore lived for myself, and killing was my goal. That must have been a harsh existence. Yes. Well, you were right about one thing, Naruto said, letting out a sigh and meeting Gaara's gaze. A shinobi requires a reason. We need something to remind us to hold on to life in light of all the deaths we encounter. But it's hardly a positive objective when your purpose is death. I see, Gaara said, still staring at him. So what do you fight for, and what is your purpose? Without pausing for a second, Naruto answered, I fight to protect everyone and everything I care about, including Kumogakure, Ka-san, and Yugito-chan. I battle to keep them safe. You fight for these people. You became much more effective in combat after Yugito fell. It caused me to question whether I was mistaken or if there was something wrong with me. In combat, no one had ever been able to match me, and I thought that my strength stemmed from my mission. But after you beat me, I started to question that, and I now question whether your strength came from your desire to defend. In a sense, it will not make you stronger, faster, or have more chakra reserves if you have people you care about and are willing to protect. It has no measurable impact of any kind. However, it gives you a sense of resolve and motivation to fight. You have stated that you live your life for yourself and to kill. Thus, you had everything to lose and nothing to gain in combat. You run the risk of losing everything you care about in battle without any potential gains if you only value yourself. However, I fight for my village and for the people I care about. I have something to gain when I fight, and that gives me motivation. I fight better, I fight less conservatively, and I remain focused. Furthermore, the benefits extend beyond the battlefield. Gaara, I can't even begin to imagine what you've been through. I also shudder to think of what my life might have been like if history had been a little different. I can't even begin to explain the significance of having people who care about you, love you, and are willing to support you. I can't even begin to explain their significance. Gaara said with a nod, I think I understand. When no sand rose to stop the motion, Naruto strode forward, hesitantly clapping Gaara on the shoulder while concealing his relief. No, you don't yet, he said. However, you've come to the conclusion that it's the better route. Over time, relationships will develop. It won't be simple, and it will undoubtedly be annoying. But you'll manage in time. After that, you'll comprehend what I'm talking about and benefit greatly from it. After taking in everything Naruto had said, Gaara stood motionless for a moment before turning and walking down the hallway, around the corner, and out of sight. I see, thank you Araki Naruto. As Gaara disappeared around the corner, Naruto felt Yugito's hands on his shoulders, spinning him around and pressing him against the wall before she leaned in to give him a passionate kiss. Half a minute later, she broke away after noticing the slightly perplexed expression on his face and said, Not that I'm complaining, but what was that for? Looking up at you, she buried her face in his chest and said, For what you said, and how it reminds of everything I love about you. Have I ever told you how lucky I am to have found you? She asked. Usually you just tend to make a subtle jab about me being dense and you having to tell me we're going out on a date. Her face momentarily changed to one of irritation as she sighed, saying, You know, sometimes you can just ruin a moment. Apologies, she grabbed his head and pulled it down to hers, rolling her eyes in frustration and saying, Just shut up and kiss me. A Konoha.nin entered Kumogakure about a day after Naruto had returned to Konoha. Normally, this would have been a bit of a challenge because the two villages were still somewhat at odds, but Jiraiya had always been a well-traveled man who had a talent for getting information that no one else could, so when he told the gate guards that he had a document that was only for the Raikage's eyes, they didn't argue too much. As a result, Jiraiya found himself in a private meeting with the Raikage within 30 minutes of his arrival in the village. The meeting was private, as long as you didn't include the 4 Anbu members who were on guard in various hidden places, but the Raikage had at least agreed to a silencing jutsu that would keep the discussions between the 2 senior shinobi confidential. Right now, the Raikage was lounging in his chair, wrapped in his office robes, his steady eyes still staring at Jiraiya from under his hat brim. Well, this is a surprise, he said. 6 years? How long has it been? Since that encounter close to the southern border, I believe there have been 5. I hope there are no ill wills. Of course not. Missions must occasionally be completed under all conditions. I have to admit that I'm curious about your visit, and it doesn't seem likely that a hostile approach will encourage you to talk more. I'd even dare say that it might even cause you to remain silent. Jiraiya took a scroll out of his vest and said, I'm here for 2 reasons. I'll start by giving you this. As Jiraiya held out the scroll, the Raikage eyed it and said, That's a Konoha messenger scroll, meant for a Konoha shinobi. Yes, I did receive it. I received mine first because I was closer to Konoha, but a messenger hawk should be on its way with yours shortly. Are you saying you traveled faster than a messenger hawk? The Raikage asked, raising an eyebrow. I'm not a Sannin for nothing you know, Jiraiya said with a chuckle. I guess. So what was so crucial that it couldn't wait for delivery by a messenger hawk? It's the details of what happened when your team assisted in the effort to retrieve Uchiha Sasuke. You should have already received the message about that. After opening the scroll and carefully going over its contents, the Raikage muttered, "Indeed," and concluded, "Well, it appears that we were fortunate that Hitaki.san completed his mission ahead of schedule and made it to the valley." He placed the scroll on his desk and looked up at Jiraiya, saying, "But I do get tired of you being sly with me. If he hadn't, we probably would have lost Naruto. Even though this document may be relevant to my village, you don't need to personally deliver a copy to me because you know I'll have my own copy by tomorrow. Really, why are you here?" "As sharp as ever I see," Jiraiya said, leaning back a little in his chair. "Okay, I'd like to train Naruto." "You already have. I'm not suggesting that we sit here and teach him a new jutsu for a month. I want to teach him as much as I can, to really train him. And I want to do it by taking him on a 2-year trip outside of this village. I'm a little hesitant about that option, so let's take him out of the village for 2 years. What choice do you have?" He pointed to the scroll on the table. "Akatsuki wants him, and that group is composed entirely of S-rank noob.nin. One of them already managed to track down Naruto, and if Kakashi hadn't been in the area he'd have disappeared without a trace. You've done a good job of training him here. He's one of the most powerful shinobi of his age group I've ever met. But he's not strong enough yet and he needs to get there, fast. That hardly explains why he needs to be taken out of the village for 2 years to train under one of Konoha's Sannin. I am, understandably, reluctant to allow him to wander the world for an extended period of time with a foreign shinobi. There are many powerful shinobi in this village that could train the boy. But not like I can. His strength comes from seals. You used a sealing ceremony to give him his Kekai Genkei, and most of the abilities from that bloodline stem from the seals formed on his skin from Megurushi no 2. Rimu. With Minato dead I know more about seals than any other shinobi alive. Given a chance to study those seals I can probably discern things that no one else can. But you may just want to see those seals so Konoha can perform the ritual itself. With what 2 young Jinchuriki, I suppose you have a point. Besides, if Naruto stays here for those 2 years and is based out of Kumo, it's only a matter of time until Akatsuki comes looking for him. With the kind of power they have available, an attack on the village itself isn't entirely out of the question, and their intelligence network would likely allow them to ambush him outside of Kumo. If Akatsuki comes after Naruto when he's with me I can drop off the face of the earth. They'd never be able to find the 2 of us. I know, and that knack you have for disappearing also leaves me mildly concerned. I'll consider it. But, you'd have to take Yugito with you as well. She'll face the same dangers as Naruto will. Having nodded, Jiraiya said, I can accept those terms. The Raikage walked to a shelf against the far wall and took out 3 large scrolls, saying, good. Before giving it to Jiraiya, he sealed the 3 scrolls into a storage scroll and said, in the meantime, I will allow you to review the seals you mentioned earlier. The black scroll contains details on the ritual, while the blue and orange scrolls contain diagrams of the seals on Naruto and Yugito, respectively. I am grateful, Raikage. Dono. I'm hoping you'll make the right decision. The Sannin bowed his head respectfully and disappeared in a whirlpool of smoke and leaves, saying, I'll keep that in mind, Jiraiya. You are dismissed. The Raikage returned to his desk, took out a scroll and writing instruments, and wrote for a few minutes, scanning the document afterward to make sure he was satisfied, then rolling it up and applying multiple seals to the outside. When the ink was dry, he leaned back in his chair and released the silencing jutsu he had previously displayed. Saru. Almost immediately, an Anbu in a monkey mask knelt down in front of his desk and said, Here, Raikage. Sama. I need you to deliver this for me, the Raikage said, tapping the recipient's name on the scroll's outer edge. Make sure that only you and the recipient handle it, and that it isn't opened until after delivery. Hello, Raikage. Sama. The Raikage turned in his chair and looked out over the village, grinning to himself, dismissed. If nothing else, Naruto and Yugito were in for an interesting 2 years. Tsunade summoned all of the shinobi who had been dispatched to pick up Sasuke to her office for a report as soon as they were all well enough to do so. No one was in danger anymore, though some did appear noticeably worse off. Choji was noticeably thinner, as if he hadn't yet regained the bulk he'd lost from the self-consumptive pill he'd taken. Neji and Mitoku each had bandages over the wounds they'd taken, and neither of them could move as easily as they were used to. Shikamaru's broken finger was splinted, but otherwise unharmed. Tsunade was grateful for that, and well aware that it was largely because of Suna and Kumo's help. Unfortunately, if it weren't for Zetsu's interference the mission may have succeeded, she said, leaning back in her chair as Naruto and Kakashi concluded their description of the close encounter with the Akatsuki member. You mentioned that you had a note explode near Sasuke's face, Naruto? With a slight nod, he said, yeah. To what extent did it harm his eyes? I don't know. Before I could see him clearly, Zetsu threw me back to the middle of that lake. I can't tell you much about him other than the fact that he was caught in the blast. Well, I wish Orochimaru didn't have a strong medic.nin at his disposal. We'll just have to hope that the Sharingan isn't in Orochimaru. There is nothing we can do about it at this time. You will all receive payment for an A-rank mission for your participation in this mission, she said, opening a drawer in her desk and taking out 10 envelopes. Mitoku sighed, but the mission was unsuccessful. Sasuke managed to escape to Orochimaru. I can't hold it against you. You were in serious trouble because of Zetsu's meddling. Additionally, Naruto may have been successful in preventing Orochimaru from obtaining the Sharingan, which was the goal of the mission. And it's impressive to do that much against an S-class noob.nin. Furthermore, I cannot send foreign shinobi on a mission this risky without paying them. Sighing, Naruto picked up his check and said, politics, not that I'm about to complain in this instance. For the first time since he concluded his description of the battle with Kidamaru, Mitoku said, Hokage. Dono, turning to face the audience. How long until I am fit for travel? After being away from Kumogakure for so long, I am excited to be back, and I know my team feels the same way. You might not have the healing factor of some of your teammates, but Rin did a pretty good job of treating you, Tsunade said, tying her fingers together and looking over them as she observed the different genin arranged in front of her. By tomorrow afternoon, you ought to be prepared to depart. However, many people in the village will be sad to see you leave. Yugito and Naruto could only nod in agreement as Mitoku said, many in Kumogakure will be happy to see us return, and that village is our home after all. Kabuto was close by, wiping off his instruments after finishing his operation on Sasuke, who was lying on an operating table with bandages wrapped around his face and eyes in Otogakure. Well, with his master's recently taken body covered in bandages from head to toe, the medic turned to face Orochimaru. The exploding note seriously damaged Sasuke's face and eyes. A few minor burns and some moderate scarring were sustained by the cornea, which was particularly damaged. One of the inmates' corneas was transplanted by me, but even for someone with my level of expertise, such procedures are challenging. Determining whether I have succeeded in keeping Sasuke from going blind will take time. I'll need to keep an eye on him even if he is able to see again to make sure Sasuke's Sharingan isn't negatively impacted by the new cornea. I understand. Fortunately, the Sound 5 perished during their mission. If they had been accountable to me for this failure, they would have endured far more suffering. You do not know how much they suffered before they died, Orochimaru. Sama, said Kabuto, adjusting his glasses. No death in battle could be less painful than what I am able to inflict. Of course, Orochimaru. Sama. The two older shinobi turned to face Sasuke, who had just said his first words since the operation started 3 hours prior, and said, I'm going to kill him. Kabuto's reply was, kill who? Sasuke.san. Low in the back of his throat, the youthful Uchiha snarled, who else but Naruto? He attempted to blind me. You can't really blame him, laughed Kabuto. What were you going to do with that Chidori of yours? Enough, Kabuto. Provoking him will not help. Furthermore, I don't want either Araki dead. Their lineage is fascinating, and I want to at least learn more about it. After that, I'll battle him and win. He will serve as a springboard for acquiring the strength required to vanquish Itachi. Beneath his bandages, Orochimaru grinned and said, good. You still have the will and desire to get even. Yes, and you better fulfill your promises. Don't worry, Sasuke. Ku. You won't believe how powerful I can make you. Good. After giving Sasuke a careful look, Orochimaru turned and approached the door, saying, come Kabuto, we have much to discuss. Sasuke.san says the shinobi that intervened at the Valley of the End was wearing a black cloak with red clouds. Kabuto paused for a moment, looking Orochimaru in the eye, and then said, it matches the description of those worn by your former compatriots. The two shinobi left the room, leaving Sasuke alone to rest. Kabuto moved a short distance down the corridor, making sure he was out of Sasuke's hearing range before he spoke. The prolonged word, yes, sounded as much like a hiss as anything else. That was Zetsu, he's Akatsuki's greatest spy. I thought that was Sasori's purpose in the organization, Kabuto scowled. Ku. Sasori creates sleeper agents out of seals, which he uses to obtain information. He never directly obtains his information. Zetsu does. It's a special fit for his skills. I wish someone else had those skills. It would be a great opportunity to study them. But why would Akatsuki stop Naruto from preventing you from obtaining the Sharingan? Kabuto scowled as he proceeded down the hallway. Since your defection, They have taken actions against you, and Itachi would have undoubtedly objected to this. Itachi.kun probably isn't aware of Zetsu's meddling. Despite his tendency towards secrecy, Pain was curious about everything his subordinates were doing. However, why would Akatsuki wish to assist you? They refused to. Clearly, they are preparing something. Are you not concerned about that? Ku. It appears that a rookie genin is the key to this plan. Sasuke.kun won't pose a threat to me, so I'll make sure to limit what I teach him. Team 4 was relieved to see Kumogakure again, and they stood on the mountain path for a few moments, admiring the familiar sights. Kumo's Great Wall, enclosing the many stone buildings that comprised its interior. The Raikage's tower, with its spire standing firm and defying the weather as it had since the village's founding, and the Raikage monument, which was barely visible, sunlight reflecting off the stained glass dome in what must have been a stunning sight to those below. Mitoku broke the hush by saying, "We should continue onwards. It appears that a storm will be hitting later in the day." "A storm strikes at some point during almost every day," Naruto said, adjusting the way his pack rode on his back as he strode ahead. "However, I am excited to return home. We were in Konoha for far too long." "You should get used to being away from Kumogakure for long stretches," Akana stated. "As you advance in rank and skill you'll be assigned more and more missions that require an extended absence." As Megurushi no 2. Rimu materialized on her skin, Yugito muttered, "Doesn't mean we have to like it, but rather that we need to adjust." She looked at Naruto and said, "If I beat you back to Kumo, you're treating me to my favorite restaurant tonight. And I, for one, think it's time to hasten our arrival as much as possible." He activated his bloodline and gave her a suspicious look. "But that's the most expensive place in the village," he said. Then the two were gone. Shite no 2. Rimu shimmering around their limbs as they sped down the mountain paths to their home, she said with a sly smile, "Then you might want to hurry." Mitoku nodded. The most powerful shinobi of their age in all of Kumogakure, and they still behave like children sometimes. "Oh, let them enjoy themselves." Akana and Mitoku continued to walk the path more slowly, arriving at the village walls much later than the two young Arikis. After a brief glance at the two, Akana said, "Well, who won?" Relaxing with those you care about is one of the things that helps people stay sane in this line of work. With a frustrated sigh, Yugito said, "Your son threw me off the path." "She's forgetting to tell you that she tried to trip me while we were running down the path," said Naruto, rolling his eyes. "By avoiding it, I was able to position myself for one of the more straightforward throws that we are all familiar with. I therefore made the decision that I could slow myself down if she tried to do so." "You threw me off the path. You have a twig stuck in your hair." Pulling it free, she frowned and said, "That's your fault." "You're arguing just for the sake of arguing," said Akana, rolling her eyes. In order to make things more difficult in the event of an invasion, the main gate of Kumo was situated on the opposite side of the village from the path. This was a minor deterrent, to be sure, but the builders of Kumo had been astute enough to take advantage of every opportunity they could when constructing the village. "Let's just get back into the village," the two Arikis said as the team began to walk around the village's walls. The team parted ways after entering the village proper, each going to their own homes. After several days of arduous travel, one could get pretty dirty, and each of them was eager to wash off the dirt they'd accumulated over the course of their journey. When they finally arrived at the gates, they were waved in without much difficulty, though the guards did congratulate both Yugito and Naruto on their promotions. As soon as he got home, Naruto jumped in the shower and enjoyed the warm water while he washed himself. He then used the shower water and a basic Suiden jutsu to clean his vest. He would have to get a few more embroidered to match his current one now that he was back in the village, but for now, he would just have to keep cleaning the one he had. He scowled a little when he noticed an unfamiliar chakra signature outside his bathroom door. He took a kunai out of his pouch and hid it inside his towel while drying his hair and sticking his head out the door. "Araiki-san, Raikage. Sama has asked you to come to his office," he said, blinking as he saw the stylized panther mask of the Anbu standing outside his door. "However, if you finished taking a bath, I'm sure you wouldn't mind." "Well, I'm nearly finished. Only a few more minutes should be needed." After saying, "Very well, I will inform Raikage Sama," he vanished in a crackle of static. After putting his hitate back in place, Naruto walked out the door to the Raikage's tower, sighing as he finished dressing himself and ducked back into the bathroom. He had assumed that the Raikage would want to speak to him and his team, but he had hoped that they would have some time before the Raikage had enough time to meet with them. He focused for a moment after finishing, noting that Akana was no longer in the house, so she must have already left. He walked the streets this time paying a little more attention to the reactions he received from the people, noting that the admiration of the people here was much more guarded and respectful than it had been in Konoha, but that had always been the case here. He was looking for the way they treated him now that they had had some time to get used to the news of his patronage, and to be honest, he didn't see much of a difference anymore. The reactions had been varied, and in some cases violent, shortly after the news had reached Kumo, but it seemed that the villagers had calmed down since then, and that things were now returning to normal. He grinned. It was good to be home. Almost immediately after arriving, he was led to the top floor of the Raikage's tower, and when he arrived at the Raikage's office, his secretary asked him to wait outside, where Akana was also sitting, so he sat down beside her and asked, "Are we waiting for Mitoku and Yugito?" "Just Yugito. Mitoku won't be coming. Who informed you of that?" "No one, not verbally at least. However, my inability to read facial expressions and body language did not help me live this long." "Why isn't Mitoku coming?" scowled Naruto. "For the mission report, you believe the Raikage would want him present." "I don't believe we're reporting on our Konoha experience. Furthermore, I have no idea why Mitoku isn't coming. Some things can be concealed by the Raikage's secretary." With an irritated glare, the secretary said, "Your endorsement is oh so appreciated." Ignoring the dry sarcasm in her voice, Akana grinned broadly and said, "You're welcome." After a couple of days of traveling together, the two Kumo.nin who were already waiting were bored and waited for Yugito for another 15 minutes. When Yugito finally arrived, Naruto gave her a mildly irritated look and asked, "What took you so long?" "The Anbu said I could finish bathing and freshening up." "You know that's just the Raikage being courteous, right?" Naruto sighed. An Anbu typically means, immediately, or nearly, when he says the Raikage would like to meet with you. She sighed. "I was told I could finish making myself presentable." With a sigh, he turned to face the secretary and said, "May we enter now?" "Yes, the Raikage said that once you were all here you could enter." Naruto started to head for the door, but Akana stopped him by grabbing hold of his shoulder and saying, "Team leader goes first, Naruto." "I've never heard that rule before," Naruto said, squinting his eyes. It's as if I'm just stalling you a bit longer for no better reason to annoy you a little bit." As any competent shinobi would, Naruto rolled his eyes and shrugged her hand off his shoulder before entering the Raikage's office through the double doors. What caught him off guard, though, was Jiraiya's casual sitting on one of the couches that were pushed against the walls at the side of the room. "Ero. Sennin, what are you doing here?" "How many times have I told you not to call me that Gaki?" Jiraiya said, sitting bolt upright. After Yugito, Akana entered and shut the door. "Well, if the glove fits," she said. With a sardonic look, Jiraiya said, "I see where he gets it from." "I've tried my best," she grinned. "But my son makes a valid point when he asks, 'What are you doing here?'" The shinobi in attendance noticed a hint of nervousness in his eyes as he forced a smile and said, "Well, I'm taking Naruto and Yugito on a training trip for 2 years or so." Shock from the two Araikis, mild surprise from the stationed Anbu who had seen Jiraiya in his earlier conversation with the Raikage, and a faint undercurrent of rage from Akana, who took a half step forward, were the slightly different reactions. What was that? After taking a deep breath, Jiraiya turned to face the Raikage and said, "Any assistance?" By shrugging, he said, "This was your idea." Well, Zetsu's meddling revealed Akatsuki's concerted efforts to enlist Yugito and Naruto. Thus, they must become more powerful. "Are you saying my lessons aren't good enough? They seem to prefer nin and taijutsu, but you specialize in genjutsu," he sighed. "I'm probably better than anyone else at analyzing their Kekai Genkei seals. In the event that Akatsuki pursues them, they must also be able to vanish from the face of the planet. They can do that if they're with me, but not in Kumo. Oh, to be able to vanish with my students. My son is one of them. That gives me a lot of comfort." She turned to the Raikage and said, "It's unbelievable that you're letting this happen. Allowing them, accompanied by a foreign shinobi, to roam the elemental countries for 2 years." From beneath the brim of his hat, the Raikage gazed out at Akana while leaning back in his chair. "I'm not." What? Jiraiya stood up in outrage. "But you said," he said. "I said that you could take the two on a 2-year training trip," the Raikage interrupted. "I never promised to let you go with them by yourself." "Ah, so you're sending me with them," said Akana, nodding. "No, actually, I need you here." "Then who are?" she scowled. She was interrupted when the doors behind her swung open at precisely the right moment and crashed into the walls with a loud boom. An Anbu arrived in Unraikyo wearing a monkey mask and claimed that the Raikage was searching for me. "So let me introduce you to Karabi." No one could dispute that he made an impressive figure, even though his arrival was somewhat undermined by his poor rhymes. There were several seconds of stunned silence as the room's occupants took in the newcomer's appearance. He was tall and heavily muscled, with dark skin that contrasted sharply with the Kumo shinobi vest he wore. He also had 7 swords strapped across his back and bracers on his forearms that were the same color as the vest. Akana finally broke the silence, saying, "You must be kidding me. Are you attempting to make my son into a perverted aspiring rapper? Hey, my rapping abilities are insane, and my rhymes are hardly bad." Rolling her eyes, Akana said, "I rest my case." The Raikage interrupted Karabi as she was about to respond, saying, "You two can debate speech patterns later. You seem to have reservations about this trip," he said, shifting slightly and looking directly at Akana. "We have more important things to discuss at the moment." "It would be an understatement to say reservations. You're still sending my son away for 2 years even if you let him go along," she said, gesturing to Karabi. "Really, do you think he'll agree with this?" The dry mutter, "Your concern is touching," came from Yugito. Instantly, Akana's features softened. "Yugito, I wouldn't want you to leave either. This is just the case." "Overwhelming," acknowledged the Raikage. "Jiraiya is correct, though. When a group like Akatsuki expresses interest in them, action must be taken to protect them. Although I am aware that you might not agree with this decision, I have concluded that it is the best one for the village, Yugito, and your son." But she recoiled in spite of herself at his tone, which was sharper than any he had used on her since she had been his genin student. "Akana," he said softly, "you may not particularly like this situation, but my decision is made and it is final. I know this will be hard on you, but I made the choice for their sakes." "Yes, Raikage." "Sama, I understand," Akana said, lowering her eyes slightly in response. Her entire expression changed as she spun around and jabbed her finger at Jiraiya, saying, "But you," turning to Karabi, "and you, if my son returns as some perverted wannabe rapper, I swear I'll castrate you and use the pieces to muffle your screams as I rip out your tongues." With his hands raised defensively in front of him, Jiraiya took a half step back. Karabi just scowled and said, "There you go dissin' my rhymes." The Raikage added his own glare, and Akana just glared at Karabi, who wisely stopped talking, saying, "I'm sure these 2 renowned shinobi will be able to curb their vices around their young charges, isn't that correct?" After a brief exchange of glances, the 2 shinobi simply nodded before saying together, "Hi, Raikage." "Dono, Sama." Despite their own considerable power, neither of them was prepared to try to defend their priceless habits here. "All right, you'll move in at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Dismissed." Jiraiya and Karabi remained silent for a few minutes, waiting for the 3 to pass well out of hearing range, while Naruto, Yugito, and Akana left right away. Jiraiya was the first to say, "You never said anything about sending another shinobi on the trip." It was fairly obvious that both of them wanted to talk to the Raikage. "I never mentioned sending you by yourself either. I don't want to take the chance. I would also like one of my own shinobi to be present. Additionally, I learned that Akatsuki members typically travel in pairs from you. Karabi can now defeat an S-class nin, while Yugito and Naruto cannot. You may also require him. If you really care about Naruto's safety, you'll go with him. If not, I'll send him out alone with Karabi." Crossing his arms across his chest, Jiraiya scowled and said, "Why didn't you tell me about this earlier? I have many reasons for what I have done, but I don't want to share all of them, so, will you continue to train them?" Jiraiya gave a curt nod, "Yes." Then he vanished in a whirl of smoke and foliage. Turning to Karabi, the Raikage said, "I can probably guess what you're still here about." In a rare moment of seriousness, Karabi dropped his rhymes and crossed his arms over his chest, saying, "I already have students. I know. I've had them since they were genin. Yes, I am aware of that. 5 years? How long has it been? Yes. It's time for them to move on, even though you told me yourself that they've mastered everything you can teach them and won't be able to use kenjutsu the way you do. They've been more than prepared for the Junin exams for more than a year, and you have every right to be proud of them. But you're the only Jinchuriki we have, and I need someone I can trust completely, and the shinobi available to me that I can trust unconditionally are all too few, and even fewer are the ones powerful enough to assist Jiraiya should he need it, and all but one of them I need in Kumo. If Jiraiya's suspicions about their abilities are correct, Yugito and Naruto might be uniquely suited to it, and they might even be able to outperform you in it." After standing there for a considerable amount of time, Karabi finally nodded. "I see," he said before turning to go to the door. "Where are you going? The killer bees got one last night on the town, you know things are going down." With a sigh, the Raikage leaned back in his chair and called for the muscular body. "Remember, 8 o'clock in the morning. Try not to be hungover." Following his return home with Akana, Naruto found himself packing even more belongings in anticipation of the journey ahead, rather than unpacking as he had intended. To his pleasant surprise, a genin team brought 6 of Kumo's shinobi vests, all of which were embroidered precisely like the one he was wearing at the time. Akana said that in order for the tailors in Kumo to have the vests ready by the time of their postponed arrival, she had sent copies of the design there via messenger hawk. Speaking of Akana, she spent the remainder of the evening being a bit clingy. Naruto couldn't really hold her responsible. She had been sent on fewer long-term missions ever since the Raikage had entrusted her with Naruto. In the 10 years she had been raising him, she had only had 4 missions of that duration, and they had never been separated for longer than a month. It was going to be a novel experience for them both to be apart for 2 years, and something that also made him a little concerned. However, his anxiety only made Akana's unwillingness to let Naruto out of her sight for the remainder of the evening a little less unbearable. However, the night passed quickly, and before they knew it, Mitoku, Yugito, Kurabi, and Jiraiya were at the main gate of Kumogakure. In order to allow their new charges to say farewell, the latter two stood far back. At the moment, Akana was holding Naruto tightly. "I'm going to miss you." He laughed bitterly. "I know, I'm not looking forward to being apart for this long either. It's going to take some getting used to." With her hands on her son's shoulders, Akana stood up straight and met her gaze. "These 2 years are going to change you. They're tumultuous enough even under normal circumstances. But don't let them change you too much. Remember what you've learned, where you've come from, and above all else, who you are. Stay true to yourself, no matter what happens. I'll remember that Ka-san." She leaned over, pushed his Hitate aside, and planted a kiss on his forehead. "I know you will, make me proud." "When have I not?" He smiled as Akana approached Yugito. Then she laughed and said, "You've got a good point." After a few awkward moments of standing there, Mitoku approached Naruto to speak with him. "So, Naruto started, it appears that the team will be disbanded. Inevitable, I suppose. A reshuffling was bound to occur after your promotions. But I hadn't expected our interactions to decrease this much." Naruto laughed and shook his head. "Even now, you distance yourself from your emotions as much as you can manage. Remember, so long as you can control them, they're a source of strength. And don't you slack off while we're gone either. I still want the chance to fight alongside you when we get back." With a smile on his lips, Mitoku held out his hand to Naruto and said, "Until we meet again then." Naruto's smile expanded as he abruptly leaned forward, snatching Mitoku's hand away and embracing him roughly. Ignoring Mitoku's sputtering indignation, he laughed. Still laughing under his breath, he broke away and gave his teammate a pat on the back. He turned and walked in the direction of Kurabi and Jiraiya, who were waiting. "I look forward to seeing what you can do when we get back." Then, however, he heard something for the first time and abruptly stopped. Mitoku was giggling. With a quizzical arched eyebrow, Naruto whirled on his heel. Mitoku's smile grew a little wider. Naruto shook his head and turned back to face the 2 men who would be greatly impacting his life over the next 2 years, for better or worse. "Yugito told me you'd do that." Unconsciously, Yugito's hands joined his as he fell into step behind him. After that, the two faced their future. However, it didn't take them long to speculate about what lay ahead for them. After 3 days of leisurely travel, they had arrived in a city. The 2 older shinobi quickly reserved a hotel room and got ready to leave. With a shocked expression on her face, Yugito was tapping her foot. "Let me get this straight, we're not even out of Kumo for 3 days, we're at the first town we've come across, and you're already ditching us to go to a bar." After shrugging, Jiraiya said, "Hey, we'll be close enough in case anything happens." "Didn't Raikage-sama tell you something about watching your vices? Hey, going to a bar isn't going to make either of you perverted or cause you to start rapping. Especially since you'll be here. Just don't do anything I wouldn't while we're gone." From his spot on the couch, Naruto snorted with laughter and asked, "Is there anything you wouldn't do if you were alone in a room with a girl?" "Well, there's this one thing where you MMPH." Jiraiya was abruptly confronted by all 3 Kumo.nin, who put their hands on his mouth and interrupted him. Naruto muttered, "I really don't think we want to know." Yugito's gaze was cold as she gazed down the Sanin, and her words were a bit less reserved. Naruto.kun is right, we don't want to know. And if you continue, I'll make sure that you are physically incapable of ever doing it. And since I don't know what it is, I guess I'll just have to be very thorough in my work. Do you understand?" Jiraiya gave a tense nod, and the Kumo.nin took a step back. However, he quickly regained his composure and turned to Kurabi. "Now, just don't try to rap at the bar, you'll scare away all the women." "Hey, Chicks dig Kurabi's rhymes, it's why I make them all the time. Jiraiya let out a frustrated groan as the two vanished down the corridor. Naruto turned in Yugito's direction. It's going to be a long couple of years. In the direction of the far-off village, 4 shinobi were making their way across the mountain trails. It was the first time the 3 of them had seen their house in more than 2 years. Additionally, the past 2 years had been an intriguing one, filled with training, adventure, and plenty of frustration. Furthermore, although the 2 older shinobi had essentially not changed, their young charges might not have. There was no doubt that Naruto had changed. His attire remained largely unchanged from when he had left: navy blue shinobi pants, an embroidered vest, and no shoes. However, those who had known him sufficiently before his journey might have noted that the symbols adorning his vest's seams and edges were a little different from what they had been. His hitate was still keeping his hair in its original length and style. However, he had matured. He had experienced a growth spurt that was only now starting to slow down, reaching a height of 5 feet 10. He had always had good muscle tone for a child, but by the time he was almost 16, his body had matured. His lean frame was covered in well-defined, corded muscles that rippled beneath his skin with every movement, even though he lacked Kurabi's protruding biceps. His whisker lines had also changed, becoming slightly darker and shifting. Together with his muscular build, it gave him a feral appearance that Yugito found rather appealing. In relation to Yugito, she had also been fortunate over the years. She still wore a shinobi vest, knee-length shorts, a tube-top undershirt, and calves wrapped in bandages, just like Naruto. Her ponytail, wrapped in bandages, hung down to the middle of her back, and the embroidery on her vest had also changed slightly. Despite being a few inches shorter than Naruto at 5 feet 7, she had matured nicely. Her body was toned and curved in all the right places, making her a lithe beauty. A few, especially Jiraiya, had approached her after inappropriate advances, but her feline appearance only served to highlight her beautiful features, making her a stunning beauty that men would die for. For the first time in more than 2 years, they found themselves standing beneath Kumo's walls. They had finally returned home after all of their travels. They walked slowly around the walls of the village to the gate, where they were almost instantly waved through. They saw 2 messenger hawks ascend from the gate as they were moving through the streets. Their low flight path indicated that they were headed for a nearby location. Naruto muttered, "It appears that news of our arrivals was disseminated before us." Yugito sighed, "With luck that means we won't have to wait long to meet with the Raikage." "Waiting for the Raikage won't be an issue," said Kurabi. "I know that we'll get sent straight through." "Why do I get the feeling there's something you're not telling me?" Naruto asked, casting a suspicious glance at Kurabi. "Because like any good shinobi you're wary and perceptive," Jiraiya said, glancing at him. Naruto replied, "Which is why I know you only looked over here so you could see that woman's reflection in the window." Jiraiya started to say something, but Yugito's fist struck the back of his head, causing him to stagger forward a half step. "I've told you not to leer at women around me." With regret, Jiraiya rubbed the back of his head. "You know, someday I'm going to stop letting you hit me." With a chuckle, Naruto said, "You know we don't need you to let us hit you." The 4 shinobi continued their walk to the tower in a similar fashion, engaging in idle chit-chat, rapping in Kurabi's case. They were not made to wait at all by the Raikage's secretary, and they were waved directly through the lobby of the Raikage's tower. Naruto didn't stop until he had opened the door. He began by noticing that the Raikage was seated in his chair and had turned to face the window. The hat, which was several inches lower than it should have been, was the only part of the Raikage that was visible because of the wide chair. The chakra signature, which he had not felt in over 2 years, was the next thing he noticed. He knew it nearly as well as his own. Even as the chair turned in a wide-eyed Akana appeared, he felt his mouth drop. "Ka-san, you're the Raikage." Seeing her burst into a chorus of laughter was definitely not what he had been expecting. She finally recovered from her outburst of laughter, but she was still laughing a lot. "No," she stammered, "but the look on your face was priceless." She removed the hat and threw it to the corner of the room like a frisbee. A large dark-skinned man, whose Raikage robes were open over a rather muscular chest, caught it as Naruto took a half step forward. He reminded Naruto a little of Kurabi, but before he could think about it much, Akana's voice interrupted him. "Kuro-kun was just nice enough to allow me this little prank." With a slight frown, Kumogakure's apparent Godem Raikage caught the hat and replaced it. "Only because you woke me up at 3 in the morning 3 weeks straight. And how many times have I asked you to call me Kurigane?" Akana propped her feet up on the desk and leaned back. "Pretty much every time we've ever seen each other. which considering we were on the same genin team is quite a lot. Talk about an exercise in futility. In order to highlight the recently arrived shinobi, Naruto cleared his throat. We just get back after more than 2 years in. Akana quickly spanned the distance between them and encircled him in a smothering embrace, cutting him off abruptly. She muttered, "I've missed you. These past few years have been quite the ordeal." Noticing that it appeared to be taller than her, Naruto gave it a hug in return. "I've missed you too, Ka-san." She looked up at him and drew away slightly, her hands taking hold of his shoulders. "You got taller, more muscular, and you move with more grace than you did before. You sure have changed, in good ways I should hope." Naruto laughed. "Don't worry, their less savory habits haven't rubbed off on either myself or Yugito-chan. It's nice to know I only have to worry about my brother speaking like that." The Raikage, who was now seated behind his desk, caught Yugito's attention. "So you are his?" "Yes, Kurabi is my younger brother by 3 years." "How long has he been speaking like that?" With a wince, the Raikage said, "Too long." "Hey, there's nothing wrong with the way I talk, always makes people stop and gawk." "That's not because they like it," Naruto said sardonically. The Raikage said, "Enough," and Kurabi was about to respond. "We can debate the shortcomings of Kurabi's rapping later." "Hey," as if his brother hadn't interrupted, Kurigane just went on, saying, "I'd like to know how skilled Naruto and Yugito are after their training with you. I'm sure Akana would as well." Jiraiya was leaning against the door jamb when he answered. "They're good, very good. Either one of them could probably go against anyone else in this room. I can't say for certain whether or not they'd win, but they'd definitely be able to make a fight out of it." "So you think they'd be ready for a promotion to Junin, I assume?" "Our students definitely know the drill, and they have mad skill." "I'll take that as a yes. I'm going to send them on a mission with an impartial Junin then, and take his opinion into account. And if they're as good as you claim, I'll promote them to Junin. Until then I want the two of you to keep your new skills under wraps. I don't want any rumors spreading through the village and influencing the Junin I choose. For now though, I'm sure they'd enjoy an opportunity to relax after returning from their trip. Akana, why don't you show them around?" "Show us around? How much could the village have changed in 2 years?" Yugito asked, raising an eyebrow. With a smile on her face, Akana took both Arikis by the arm and led them out the door. "You'd be surprised." With a suspicious narrowing of his eyes, Naruto asked, "What does that mean?" With a slight smile, Akana said, "Oh, you'll see." Before long, the 3 blondes were strolling through the streets of the village, with Akana asking the 2 younger shinobi a lot of questions concerning their journey. There were many pleasant memories as well as some less appealing ones. At the moment, Naruto was experiencing one of the latter memories. Then there was the one time Kurabi dragged us along to a singing contest for moral support. "He rapped at a singing concert?" Akana flinched. "Yep. Well, at least you got to hear some good singers out of the deal." Yugito gave her a blank look and said, "He won." "It was that bad?" Akana winced once more. She nodded. "I don't know how he managed to find a group of vocalists who were that horrible, but it was definitely painful to sit through." "Yeah," Naruto grumbled, "not one of the better moments of the trip. At least the time Jiraiya tried peeping on us was amusing at the end." "What?" Akana asked, halting abruptly as a hint of peril crept into her voice. "Don't worry," Naruto said, laughing as the memory returned to him, "he paid for it." The 2 Arikis had been on their training trip for about 3 months and were now taking much-needed breaks. Both of their sensei were vicious, and sometimes their bloodline's healing ability was insufficient to ease the pain in their muscles. In order to relieve their aches and pains and enjoy each other's company, they had retired to a natural onsen. Until Naruto heard a faint scurrying sound in the bushes, that is. Only the back of his head was visible over the rock rim as he sank slightly deeper in the water. He then used a Shiki no to Rimu to activate his bloodline and sharpen his senses. The pervert was squatting in the bushes some 30 yards away, so there was no question about it. He glanced at Yugito, who quickly grasped the situation. Following a chakra explosion, the 2 dripping Arikas, each young shinobi only wearing their swimsuits, found themselves perched atop the massive avatars of their totems. Yugito's dangerously sweet voice echoed between them, "Oh Jiraiya, what have I told you about trying that?" Jiraiya swallowed uneasily. This clearly necessitated a swift getaway, and since the 2 Arikis were standing on their massive totems, he would have to use Kachiyose no Jutsu. After a massive cloud of smoke, Jiraiya was crouching on top of Gamabunta, the boss toad. "Come on Bunta, we need to get out of here." "I don't see any enemies around, what's going on?" Before Jiraiya could say anything, Yugito hissed, that pervert tried to peep on us. Jiraiya swallowed hard as she realized that calling forth Gamabunta might not have been the best course of action. What? You tried to peep on Minato's boy, she exclaimed. Suffice to say, smirking, Naruto remarked, he never attempted that stunt again. Sounds like you had an interesting few years, said Akana, rolling her eyes. Not everything was bad, Naruto shrugged. Jiraiya showed us a number of fascinating sights. He is fairly familiar with the elemental nations. You would be shocked at how many locations he has visited, including the Shodai's Grove in Ho no Kuni, the crystal caves of Tasuki no Kuni, and the sailboat races of Mizu no Kuni. In addition to that, we underwent training. Although brutal at times, it was ultimately worthwhile. However, I have a question regarding the village. What became of the Yondaime Raikage? Kurigane was named as his successor after he retired approximately a year ago. There wasn't exactly any opposition because he was still available to help make the appointment happen. He is currently out assisting in the supervision of a group of academy students on a training trip. Despite never having children of his own, he has always enjoyed working with young children. He therefore reasoned that he could work with some of the younger pupils now that he had more time. He seems to be enjoying his retirement, which is good to hear. In any case, where are you taking us? Only a few of the larger estates and training grounds are located over here. The Ariki's favorite training ground as kids was now guarded by an elaborate iron gate set into a granite wall. Akana stopped, dispelling a genjutsu and stating, one less training ground and one more estate now. The two Arikis stood in disbelief for a while before Yugito broke the hush. They constructed an estate for us? Yes, the Yondaime Raikage decided to begin building an estate because your 16th birthday was approaching so soon after you returned. Her lips quirked up in a melancholy smile as she said, you're welcome back home whenever you'd like, of course. It ended just over a month ago, so the Godem Raikage decided you could move in upon your return. However, you now own a home of your own. Still reeling from the shock, Naruto said, they just built it for us, free of charge? Just the necessities for now. Training grounds, manor, and library. With assistance from a few others who knew you prior to your training trip, I supplied the majority of the landscaping and design concepts. The grounds were terraformed by a few Doten users, using wood from Ho no Kuni and stone from Tasuki no Kuni. You should adore it. Then she vanished in a whirlpool of static electricity. I'll let you look through it for the first time by yourselves. She reappeared a few blocks away, leaning back against a nearby wall and gazing up at the sky. She had always heard that it can be hard for parents to watch their kids grow up, and in situations like this, she could believe it. When she got Naruto back, it was kind of weird, almost like letting him go. But she was also proud of the man he was becoming, a man she had helped shape as much as anyone else. It was a bit of a bittersweet moment, she thought. After a few seconds of Yugito and Naruto standing at the gate, Naruto strode forward, pushed the gate open, and took his first steps into the compound. The buildings were made of a dark stone and were shaped like cylinders and domes, without the sharp corners that would have stood out in a natural setting. The flora had been left mostly intact, though it had been pruned so that it suggested paths winding through the trees and underbrush. It was clear that the first building they entered was meant to be a dojo. The one-room structure had a hard, packed earth floor surrounded by low, wooden benches, thickly woven tatami maps around the arena's edges in case some extra padding was needed, and a wide range of weapons hung on the walls, some of which resembled the weapons they had seen Mitoku wield. Neither of them doubted that their former teammate had helped stock the place, at the very least. Just behind the dojo was another training ground, sunk 5 feet into the ground and lined with stone to help keep stray jutsu from destroying the buildings and landscapes beyond. A spring-fed pool was located at one end of the ground, providing fuel for any Sweden techniques someone might want to try. As they explored further, they came to the small cliffs they remembered from their childhood, and the ground at the bottom had always been peppered with a couple of natural onsen, most of which were now surrounded by stone walls for privacy. For one, however, the Doten users extended the cliff face and enclosed it in a small grotto, which would likely be a little dark at night, but it was undeniably a nice touch. They then came to the main group of buildings on the compound, which included a manor, a library, and 2 smaller structures on either side. They supposedly had guest houses, but as the clan expanded, they could likely accommodate more of its members. They made the decision to go inside the library first. A spacious sitting area took up the front of the building, and it was dominated by 2 roaring fireplaces, mahogany tables, and stuffed leather armchairs. The remainder of the structure was occupied by polished wood bookcases. They had already stocked some of them. Scrolls about history, genjutsu theory, taijutsu, especially their own style. ninjutsu they would learn or would like to learn, and their bloodline were discovered by the Araikis. Even with the wealth of information already available, there was still room for more scrolls in the future. They then went to the actual mansion. It had leather furniture, plush carpeting, wood paneling, and lavish upholstery. During the long winter months in Kumo, the mansion appeared cozier thanks to the fireplaces in several of the rooms. In the middle of the mansion was a courtyard, which was dominated by a monolithic tree that rose above the roofs. The compound felt natural overall. It was created with the intention of blending in with the surroundings and blending in with nature. Akana had performed her duties admirably, and the location was one of wild beauty. Like all the other rooms in the house, the master bedroom was lovely. It was dominated by a huge bed that was as soft as feathers. Dark wooden dressers and wardrobes lined the room's sides, and another fireplace stood close to the foot of the bed. They could watch the gate from the large windows, which also offered a stunning view of the compound. Painstakingly crafted from red and white granite, the attached bathrooms were equally impressive. Naruto felt Yugito's arms encircle them from behind just as he was ready to depart to explore the rest of the mansion. Naruto raised an eyebrow. We're completely alone in a brand new house with a brand new and luxuriously furnished bedroom. Yugito rolled her eyes and slipped her fingers around his torso, undoing the fastenings of his vest. We've just returned to our home village. She gently nibbled his ear as she leaned forward slightly and pressed herself against his back. With her breath hot against his ear, she whispered, I think it's not quite time to leave yet. You mean? She spun him around and stripped him of his vest as she giggled softly. He didn't realize until the turn was over that she had also, at one point, succeeded in removing every article of clothing she had been wearing from her torso. With a smile spreading across her features, she reached up and pulled his head forward until his forehead was resting against hers. She turned and sauntered over to the bed, peering behind her and giving him a seductive smile. You coming? She asked, finishing her turn just in time to be borne down to the bed beneath him. For all your cunning when it comes to combat, you sure are clueless when it comes to the fairer sex. Speaking of sex, she said. The first rays of the morning sun hit Naruto's whiskered face, causing him to shift in his sleep. As Yugito's warm body tried to bury itself in his own, he heard a mewl of protest next to him, and his eyes fluttered open. He swiveled his head, laughing quietly as his eyes found her sleeping body. Her legs entwined with his, one arm tossed carelessly across his chest. He moved cautiously, first removing himself from the maze of blankets and limbs. Although Yugito shifted a little uneasily from the lack of warmth, he was able to free himself without waking her after some effort. After getting to his feet, Naruto went straight to the windows and closed the curtains without making any noise. She didn't have to be awakened by the sun just because he had been. Though neither of them had given it much thought at the time, he found himself wishing they had considered closing the curtains before hitting the bed. Naruto blushed slightly as he recalled what had happened that evening. They had undoubtedly dabbled in the past, but never gone that far. However, there was no doubting that it felt natural. Perhaps they had loved one another for longer than either of them really realized. The consummation had arrived, and there were no adequate words to express it. It had also become a very long night. It was a fantastic night when Yugito's feline curiosity and their considerable stamina met. He kissed Yugito lightly on the forehead while wearing a gentle smile. After that, he dug through his storage scrolls, opened his shampoo and soap, and slipped into the bathroom. He soon realized that the shower was as pleasant as it appeared, and he relaxed under the warm water's spray for a considerable amount of time. After a while, he climbed out of the shower and returned to the bedroom while toweling himself off. Yugito had been showering when he woke up. She stretched the stiffness of the night from her muscles, letting her hair fall down her back instead of in its typical ponytail. Yugito, for her part, heard the door swing open and turned to see Naruto returning to the room. Leaning lightly to her feet, she strode over and put her arms and hands around his neck before planting a long, passionate kiss on his lips. After holding it for a few seconds, she withdrew, smiling contentedly as she looked up at him. Morning. Good morning, indeed, he said with a quiet laugh. How are you feeling? Wonderful, she said, pushing herself a little closer as her smile grew. With a small laugh, he bent to plant a kiss on the top of her head. Good to hear. With a gentle shove, she let the door swing gently shut. Of course it is. Now, if you'll excuse me, she said, pushing past him and into the bathroom. I'm going to take a shower of my own. Naruto returned to his luggage, opened a change of clothes, and put them on. He thought for a moment about picking up the clothes that were strewn all over the room, but decided that could wait until later. Rather, he went to the kitchen downstairs, gathered the ingredients, and started preparing breakfast. He and Yugito had learned how to cook from Jiraiya. Naruto assumed it only made sense after giving it some more thought, but the old pervert was a surprisingly good chef. He would want to be able to prepare some tasty meals for himself if he traveled almost half as much as the Toad Sage. He quickly prepared the food with the assistance of a few clones, and soon he was setting the plates full of sausages and pancakes on the table. Around that time, Yugito, wearing a cozy robe and her hair pulled back in its typical ponytail, slipped into the room. She slid into a chair and piled a bunch of food on her plate. She noticed Naruto's amused expression as she looked up. "What? I worked up an appetite last night." At that, he couldn't help but laugh a little, his cheeks blushing slightly. Yugito-chan, last night was. Her eyes grew softer as she raised her head to face him. She put another piece of food in her mouth, swallowed it, and then looked up at him once more. "I know," she whispered, "you don't have to say it." As she did, she smiled slightly, her demeanor regaining the playful edge he had grown so accustomed to. "Of course, that doesn't mean I wouldn't like to hear it." That caused him to laugh a little. "I love you, Yugito-chan." The moment, which had seemed so romantically promising, was abruptly cut short when both Arikis sensed a new chakra signature showing up at the front door. "I know. I love you too." Yugito, who had not yet taken off his clothes, stayed at the table while Naruto got up to investigate. There was an Anbu waiting outside when he opened the door. "Ariki-san, the Raikage asked me to deliver this to you. It contains information on the mission he's sending you on," the Anbu said, holding out a scroll to Naruto. As he took the scroll, Naruto grimaced a little and said, "I didn't think he'd send you this early." It's 11 o'clock. Naruto peered out the door, perhaps for the first time, taking note of the time of day and the sun's position. Must have slept in later than I thought. Well, thanks for dropping this off." After saying, "Don't mention it, Ariki-san," the Anbu vanished in a burst of static. Naruto gently pushed the door and allowed it to swing back shut. As he made his way back into the manor, he opened the scroll and looked through its contents. As soon as Naruto returned to the kitchen, Yugito looked up and saw the unrolled scroll in his hands. "What do you have there?" Details of that mission the Raikage was talking about earlier. We're going to be on a 4-man team. The other 2 members of our team are a Junin who's a bit older than us and a Tokubetsu Junin who's approximately our age. We're supposed to meet them at the front gate at 2 in the afternoon. For the mission itself though, apparently a few Kiri.nin have been spotted just inside our borders. Their motives aren't known yet, but they're suspected hostiles. We're supposed to determine whether or not that's true and, if necessary, eliminate them. Kiri.nin wonder what side of the civil war they're fighting on." As he sat down to eat, Naruto rolled the scroll back up and placed it on the table. "Doesn't matter. They've already let their own country go to hell. I see no reason to let them spread that kind of chaos here." With 15 minutes to spare, the couple arrived at the front gate, their trained eyes scanning the throng of pedestrians to check if either of their soon-to-be teammates had yet to arrive. And sure enough, through the throng, one motionless figure was visible, the hitate around his forehead glinting in the sunlight. The two maneuvered through the crowd with relative ease, their nimble bodies navigating the busy main street of the village. They saw Mitoku leaning against a tree and his eyes constantly scanning the crowd when they eventually broke through. He was still not quite as tall as Naruto, but his wiry figure had grown over the years. Only his dark gray trench coat, which he wore over his shinobi vest, had changed. When he saw the two, he lowered his head slightly in recognition and smiled slightly before pushing off the tree and standing up. "Greetings, it is nice to finally see you again. Mitoku. It's been a while. What are you doing here?" "It has indeed been a long time. I'm going to be one of your teammates for this mission." "So that would make you a Tokubetsu Junin then?" asked Naruto with a smile. "Yes, I was promoted to Chunin 6 months after you left in the subsequent Chunin exams. I was promoted to Tokubetsu Junin a few months ago." Naruto was about to say, congratulations, when he felt a brief burst of chakra behind him, which was indicative of ascension. He turned to observe the newcomer, who was probably their team's final member. Dressed in typical shinobi attire, he had a solid build, stood 5 feet 8, and had an unremarkable appearance. He appeared to wear a frown all the time, as evidenced by the slight lines that formed around his mouth. However, a skilled shinobi could tell that this newcomer was not to be taken lightly despite his rather ordinary and solemn appearance. Every move he made was assured and certain. And he had the eyes of someone who had seen innumerable instances of life and death, and survived them all. "I am Yokoshi Kenjiro and I have been assigned by the Raikage to evaluate the two of you over the course of this mission. I understand that as genin teammates the three of you would undoubtedly like to catch up, but I would like to request that you not talk about your training until after the mission is completed. Naruto sighed. Guess I can understand that, it's going to make for a boring trip though. With a shrug of his own, Kenjiro said, some missions are like that. The four shinobi then vanished from view as they sped into the untamed area around Kumo. They quickly arrived at the area where the Kiri.nin had been sighted. After that, however, things slowed down somewhat. In order to collect the pertinent rumors that had proliferated throughout the region, they had to travel to small towns and villages, leading them through a number of detours and dead ends while they laboriously separated which rumors were wild lies and which had a glimmer of truth was an exasperating task. Additionally, it was a laborious task that would have taken a long time had they not run into something while commuting between two settlements. Megurushi and Ashiki no 2. Rimu were both activated when Naruto and Yugito abruptly stopped. Both of their teammates were drawn to their mysterious behavior, and Midoku was the one who raised the query. What is it? Before answering, Naruto tossed his head around and took a few deep breaths. The two Arikis immediately bounded off through the forest, Midoku and Kenjiro trailing closely behind. Blood. Quite a bit of it, I think. It's from the northeast, come on. They searched for the source of the scent for roughly 5 minutes. The group of shinobi ended up at the edge of a blood-soaked clearing. 4 hardly distinguishable corpses with Kiri Hittites loosely clustered in the middle of the clearing made the source of the blood easily visible. The group of living shinobi cautiously made their way toward them before assessing the severe injuries on their bodies. It quickly became clear that bladed weapons, which had ripped deeply into the bodies in multiple locations, were responsible for the wounds. But the other 3 Kumo.nin knew otherwise. Kenjiro muttered. It looks like whoever attacked these 4 was vicious. All 3 had a great deal of sword experience. Midoku had trained with them all of his life, and Yugito and Naruto had studied under the man who was arguably Kumo's best swordsman for a number of years. They had all 3 learned a lot about the blade, and not just how to use it to cut people. Analyzing previously inflicted wounds was another essential ability for any blade wielder. Since this was basically an audition for their promotion, Midoku was willing to let them do the analysis even though he was probably better at it than either of his friends. Before Yugito took over, Naruto showed each wound. No, he said, pointing to a few of the slashes. People who try to overwhelm their opponents generally utilize heavy weapons. These were inflicted by slimmer blades, something more like a katana, though the edges were straight. And if you look here, here, and here, they're all wounds that kill quickly and cleanly. This one was to the base of the skull. That blow split open the spinal cord. This thrust skewered him through both lungs and his heart, while this guy has his throat slit. These attacks are indicative of someone who utilizes precise thrusts and stabs to kill their opponents, not the wild slashing that caused the majority of these wounds. Then what's with all the other wounds? Kenjiro scowled. They were inflicted very quickly after these shinobi were already killed. Why? Naruto looked around the clearing and straightened. There are several possibilities. Sometimes corpse mutilations are done in fits of anger, sometimes used to attempt to demoralize those enemies that are not yet dead. But I'd bet my bloodline that this was done with 2 objectives in mind. The first of which was to draw attention. And what makes you think that? Because I know the second reason was to disguise a scent. And what scent is that? Yugito interrupted, providing him with the answer. Snake. As they spun around, Midoku and Kenjiro twitched infinitesimally in surprise, saying, Ku, very perceptive. Having already detected Orochimaru, Kabuto, and Sasuke's approach, Naruto and Yugito turned more slowly. Your growth seems to be as great as one would expect after a few years training under Jiraiya. As Naruto looked at the 3 menacing shinobi positioned across from them, his eyes narrowed. He remembered how Orochimaru and Kabuto had appeared the last time he had seen them. As one might anticipate from someone of that age, Sasuke had matured. And from behind a thick layer of scars that Naruto could only assume were caused by the exploding kunai all those years ago, his Sharingan gazed at him hostilely. He tilted his head to the side and looked directly at the Uchiha, who brushed aside a genjutsu. What's the matter, didn't you get enough sleep? You've got these bags under your eyes or something. The Uchiha took a half step forward, his hand closing around the hilt of his sword, his teeth grinding together almost audibly. But Orochimaru put a restraining hand on his shoulder and stopped him. Now Sasuke-kun, you should know better than to let your enemies goad you into acting carelessly. Then let's attack already. We're not going to capture those 2 by standing around. And I want my revenge for what he tried to do to me. You mean trying to blind you? What was your Chidori supposed to do, resuscitate me? As Orochimaru's voice hissed across the clearing, everyone's eyes turned to him. Enough, he said. I will give the two of you one last opportunity to join me willingly before we take you by force. The symbols surrounding Naruto's vest, which had been slightly altered to act as storage seals, released a puff of smoke. Out of the extra-dimensional space came a blade. Though the metal was a matte black with the blue symbols of his bloodline etched along the center of the blade, it was shaped exactly like the blades that Kurabi used. Even as a Shiki no 2. Rimu waned to give way to Mantoru no 2. Rimu. He leveled the blade at Orochimaru. Not interested, and unlike you, I'm not about to give you any second chances. Orochimaru's laughter turned to a repulsive gagging noise as Kusangani came out of his mouth. Kabuto's hands glowed as he used his chakra scalpels, and Sasuke also pulled out his Chikudo. Critically, Naruto's gaze swept over the gathered Nin. Orochimaru's the biggest threat, and I'm not sure how Sasuke and Kabuto compare to each other. My wind affinity allows me to counter Sasuke's lightning affinity though, and my water his fire, so I'll take him. And if Yugito can hold her own against Jiraiya, she should be able to do the same with Orochimaru, though she could probably use some help from Mitoku. So that would leave Kabuto to you, Kenjiro. Before the clearing descended into anarchy, the Junin nodded and said, your reasoning seems sound. As it soon became clear that the Uchiha was determined to let nothing stand between him and the young blonde, it was for the best that the Kumo team had consented to let Naruto handle Sasuke. In an attempt to decipher and commit to memory the blonde's sword technique, his Sharingan whirled as he closed in. But Naruto didn't want to be involved in that. He stopped Sasuke's slash cold, sliding 1 foot back as his sword rose, presenting the most basic block imaginable. You don't really expect me to tip my hand to those eyes of yours, do you? Sasuke stifled a snarl of rage as he withdrew his blade, then charged forward in a sudden flurry of strikes. Naruto's mouth corners lifted in the tiniest hint of a smile. Before the unrelenting attack, Naruto freely conceded, his blade slicing through the air and putting itself in between every blow from Sasuke and himself. The Uchiha smirked triumphantly and leapt back after the pattern held for 20 long seconds. An eyebrow was raised by Naruto, who said, you sure seem pleased with yourself. Your blade work doesn't match mine. With a single smile, Naruto drew a second blade from the seals at his vest's seams and edges. Naruto charged forward this time, saying, unlike you, my kenjutsu training wasn't limited to utilizing one blade. In the face of Naruto's barrage of blows, Sasuke was forced back onto his heels as his two blades rose into a blinding series of strikes. Then, just below Naruto's neck, a pair of fox jaws appeared from Mantoru no 2. Rimu's protective chakra field, catching a third blade as it was being unsealed. Even as a fox's limbs appeared, trapping 4 more blades at the Ariki's knees and elbows, Sasuke's eyes widened. As Naruto charged forward and leapt into the air to get closer to the Uchiha, his smile took on a positively feral hue. As they saw Naruto enter, Sasuke's Sharingan whirled wildly. Sasuke made an unsuccessful attempt to memorize and predict the movements. It was the most intricate kenjutsu style the Uchiha had ever seen. The angles, the variations, the almost unprecedented number of blades used in combat, the sheer possibilities. Despite his impressive dojutsu, he was unable to fully understand Naruto's attack. Shikudo frantically raised to offer some semblance of defense as he dove to the side. Despite Sasuke's last-minute evasion, Naruto was able to use 5 of his blades. One was successfully parried by the Chikudo, preventing another. Sasuke's upper arm, torso, and thigh were all severely slashed by the other 3. The Uchiha struggled to stay upright and rolled backwards, blood streaming from his wounds. He was breathing heavily while staring at Naruto, who had a look of disbelief on his face. You can't follow it, can you? Can't read my sword work? How is this possible? I trained under Orochimaru for years, Asanin. You don't get it, do you? You never have. I spent my years under Jiraiya and Kurabi, 2 powerful shinobi who wanted to help me. So they did their best to ensure that I became as skilled as possible. You trained under Orochimaru, who while possibly was just as powerful as my senseis sought to use you. So he did everything in his power to ensure that you remained under his. Sure, he wanted your body in good shape and your chakra reserves as large as possible to help him out when he finally stole that body. But your knowledge of battle, of tactics, of just useless to him. So he taught you just enough to keep you satisfied. The brunette nodded. I told you years ago that there was a reason shortcuts were shortcuts instead of merely the way it was done. But you didn't listen. You tried to get stronger the easy way, but in the end only managed to doom yourself. If you continue to think that you can obtain skill and knowledge that easily, you'll never be able to defeat me, or your brother. Keeping his hold on his Chikudo, Sasuke performed a brief series of hand seals. His hand instantly wreathed in lightning chakra, which spread down to coat his blade. As he charged back towards Naruto, he growled his words out from between clenched teeth. "Don't underestimate me." Naruto just waited until the very last moment to act, bracing himself to fend off the attack. Then a number of things occurred simultaneously. As his Mantoru no to Ryu's chakra spread, it covered his sword's blades. Even as the blade swung, that chakra was broken down and transformed into wind chakra. Finally, beneath the protective chakra cloak of Mantoru no to Ryu, Chikara no to Ryu's more intense chakra concentration was revealed. Sasuke tried to back away, but it was too late, and his eyes widened. The sword's severed blade flew through the air in a flashing arc as Naruto's blade ripped through the Chikudo with a scream of tormented metal. The collision of metal and chakra may have nearly destroyed Sasuke's sword, but Naruto's was only slightly slowed. It proceeded along its course, effortlessly slicing a deep gash through the lung and ribs of the Uchiha. The useless hilt of his sword fell from numbed fingers as he fell backwards, blood still frothing at his lips. Naruto aligned his blade one final time as he stood over his fallen opponent, his chakra blazing all around him. "It's not a matter of me underestimating you, Sasuke. It's a matter of you not realizing your own limits, and there's no Akatsuki member to intervene this time." Knowing that he would be able to sense Sasuke, Naruto had begun slowly. Yugito and Mitoku were afraid to use that tactic against Orochimaru. Both of them were aware that the smallest error could result in death and that he was by far the more dangerous opponent. As Yugito got closer, Mitoku hung back and fired a few shots from his Maganechiku Kushin at Orochimaru. Since employing this tactic against Kidamaru all those years ago, he had advanced significantly. His lethal projectiles could be fired from a variety of body parts, and he could fire more shots with less time between them. In fact, his mastery of the technique was the main factor in his promotion to Tokubetsu Junin, and it was lethal enough to make even someone like Orochimaru exercise extreme caution when using it. Yugito was able to approach the perilous Sannin with relative ease thanks to that lethal barrage. And she stepped in with force. She closed within melee range with her bloodline active, 7 blades in both hands, and the Mantoru no to Ryu chakra. Unknowingly employing nearly the same attack pattern Naruto used against Sasuke, she launched herself at the Sannin as soon as she was close enough. Like Sasuke, Orochimaru was taken aback when he witnessed his opponent perform a kenjutsu move he had never seen before. But he also had a lot more experience and was far more skilled than Sasuke. Neither the Araikis nor the Uchiha had drawn breath as long as he had been drawing Kusangani for battle. He was therefore able to analyze the attack even though he was unable to fully analyze the sword style. Her blades whizzed past within millimeters of his pale skin, and he twisted as he moved low and sideways, away from Yugito's center of mass. As Yugito landed and turned to face him, Kusangani vanished up his sleeve, but he kept leaping back. Then he threw his arms out in front of him, and about a dozen snakes sprang out of his sleeve and flew in Yugito's direction. The Kusangani blades slid out of their mouths as each of them widened their maws. In order to stabilize himself and gain more control over his snakes, he had planned to plant his feet. Regretfully for him, Mitoku was still paying close attention, and with Orochimaru out of Yugito's way, Mitoku opened up again, sending a new hail of accelerated projectiles toward the Sannin. Therefore, Orochimaru had to dodge again, depriving himself of the focus he needed to control the snakes as effectively as he had hoped. Yugito had all the chance he needed. Kurabi developed his kenjutsu style virtually from the ground up with little assistance, producing an impressive toolkit of moves and an unprecedented 7 swords. Its sole significant flaw was that Kurabi's range of motion was restricted because he had to maintain his limbs bent to hold his blades in place. In any case, he had developed into one of the most skilled swordsmen in the elemental nations. However, he was quickly being approached by Yugito and Naruto. Despite spending countless hours training over the past few years, they might not have yet possessed the same innate comprehension of the sword style that he did. In order to enable the totem to manifest portions of its chakra body from Mantoru no to Ryu's protective chakra field, Jiraiya had been able to teach the couple how to partially incarnate their totem. Consequently, they were able to secure the blades in place using their totems rather than their joints. This ability made an already lethal style much more lethal by giving both Araikis far more mobility than Kurabi had. The swords clinging to Yugito's body shifted their angles as the chakra surrounding her writhed. Then, as the blades flashed around her, she hopped a little and tucked herself into an unlikely twist and roll. Even as the quick sounds of steel on steel and steel slicing through flesh arose from the wriggling mass of snakes, she vanished into it. 2 of the snakes were thrown clear, out of Yugito's line of sight and beyond her blades. The remaining 10 were torn to pieces, so completely torn that not even Orochimaru could control them. Then, with Shite no 2. Rimu glimmering beneath Mantoru no 2. Rimu. Yugito charged forward, catching up to the 2 before Orochimaru could prepare a jutsu to stop her. In an effort to get her to pull short, he made his 2 surviving snakes loop and twist. But with a single, placed shot, Mitoku broke both of their skulls. The rest of the distance was within reach, and Yugito grinned grimly in satisfaction as she felt her blades slicing through the Sannin. However, he appeared to melt back into the ground as her blades pierced him, turning him into white goo. Noting that his chakra signature appeared to have vanished entirely, she pulled up short. She prepared to defend herself from any attack, but Orochimaru appeared from the ground a considerable distance away, so she soon realized that the precaution was pointless. Another tangle of snakes flew out of his sleeves, and he wasn't even looking at her. On their way to Naruto and Sasuke, they slithered low along the ground. She warned him by opening her mouth. However, the snakes rushed forward before she could finish speaking, encircling the Uchiha and dragging him back just in time for Naruto's sword to pierce the ground. Orochimaru, scowling in dismay at the wounds adorning the young shinobi's body, brought his young apprentice back to him. He had hoped that Sasuke would have at least shown that he could fight against Kurabi and Jiraiya's apprentices, but the Arikis were stronger than he had thought. It also didn't help that Sasuke nearly died as a result of letting his rage and desire for vengeance control him. "Come Kabuto, we are leaving." The medic quickly appeared beside Orochimaru, who could pull away easily because of the 2 tendons he had successfully severed in Kenjiro's left leg. However, he was also a little worse off. A freshly closed wound on his shoulder seemed to have bled rather heavily when it was first received, and his tabard was singed from a lightning strike he hadn't quite avoided. Of course Orochimaru. Sama. Even as he sank into the ground with his subordinates, Orochimaru turned to face the 2 Arikis, a wide smile spreading across his face. He vanished, engulfed by the damp earth. Ku. The 2 of you have progressed further than I'd anticipated. It appears that my former teammate isn't quite as useless as I thought. But don't worry, I've hardly given up on 2 specimens as interesting as you. But the Arikis weren't going to take any chances, so Naruto swiftly swept the Kumo.nin team away from the battlefield by summoning an enormous house-sized incarnation of his totem. Mitoku noticed that even as the totem took shape, Megurushi no 2. Rimu continued to cling to his skin. It would seem that even with 2. Rimu Kanju. Ganj. The Arikis were now able to fully utilize their bloodline. It was impossible to pursue Orochimaru at this point, especially with Kenjiro's leg so badly injured. At the moment, Naruto's totem was moving quickly back towards Kumo because he would be too exposed to the dangerous Sannin. Kenjiro finally broke the gloomy silence that had pervaded the journey for several minutes. "You handled Orochimaru fairly well, Yugito. And Sasuke is believed to be high Junin level, yet you took him out like he was nothing." He sighed. "I was able to goad him into losing his temper, and my elemental affinities match up well against his. My primary is wind to his lightning, and though they didn't come into play, my secondary is water against his fire. Regardless, that was an impressive display the 2 of you put on. My report will definitely help your case for being promoted." With brief smiles, the 2 said, "We're glad to hear that." Though their respective values to him varied greatly, Orochimaru stood in a forest clearing a distance away, looking down on his 2 most valued subordinates. As he worked on the deep gash in Sasuke's chest, Kabuto was kneeling in the mountain grass, his hands glowing with medical chakra. After repairing skin, sinew, muscle, bone, and flesh for roughly 15 minutes, Kabuto stood up as the chakra's radiance dwindled from his hands. Orochimaru, who had been patiently waiting the entire time, finally spoke up. "How is he?" "I was able to repair much of the damage, Orochimaru. Sama. His life is no longer in danger and he is capable of movement under his own power. However, until I can get him to a place where I'm better able to treat him, I cannot fully repair the damage. That injury was quite extensive. I'll be able to handle it with ease when we make it back to the base, but until then, Sasuke-san, you would be well advised to avoid activity any more strenuous than traveling through the trees." After giving one nod, Sasuke stood up and grimaced, but not even Orochimaru could tell if it was from pain or rage. "I understand. It is good that no permanent damage was done. Still, I am disappointed. I had expected you to do better against Naruto-kun." Sasuke turned, hiding his face from Orochimaru's view while turning back to face Kumogakure. Thus, as he considered Naruto's words and Orochimaru's word choice, he was able to easily hide the storm of emotions that raged across it. Yes, it appears that I have not gained the strength I need. Kenjiro's injured leg caused the team to slow down a little, and it took 4 days to return to Kumogakure. A wound that none of the Kumo.nin in attendance were trained or knowledgeable to treat. The Raikage gave them their promotion almost immediately after they returned. Although it was a little unsettling that Orochimaru would go to such lengths to try to catch them, their talent was evident. Additionally, it was determined that Kurabi and Jiraiya's glowing testimonies were more than enough justification to declare the couple Junin. They had a celebratory dinner at Mount Unraikyo that evening, and Kurabi was quite taken aback when they arrived. Naturally, Akana had joined the pair, and Mitoku had also arrived to complete their former Genin team, which had all risen above the Chunin rank. Along with them was the Raikage, who was also a little eager to see his family again. The former Raikage had also made his way back to the village and was prepared to attend the celebration of his former student's first promotion of her students to the rank of Junin. Everyone sat down to eat after Kurabi stopped complaining about the sudden disruption, which sounded really strange in his rapping speech pattern. The dinner was much appreciated by Yugito and Naruto. They hadn't had a chance to unwind without thinking about the future in such a long time. They had been worried about their progress and future almost all the time, from the trip to Konoha following the disclosure of Naruto's ancestry to the mission they had just returned from. The last mission before becoming a Chunin, the years of almost constant training, the worry about becoming a Chunin, and the search for Tsundade to heal Yugito. However, since Akatsuki had become so silent, they were now Junin and had no significant impediments or obstacles in the future. Instead, they spent a leisurely evening with almost everyone in Kumo who held significance for them. They could then anticipate living in their own home, having their own bed, and, for the first time in a long time, being able to perform the duties of a regular shinobi. Really, neither of them would want to be anywhere else. Sasuke moved swiftly through Orochimaru's stronghold's hallways. He had been extremely patient. The Sannin's current body had started to fail him over the last few months, significantly lowering Orochimaru's chakra and physical capabilities. To put it briefly, the Snake Sannin would be at a severe disadvantage in any battle scenario, which is undoubtedly advantageous given the potentially contentious discussion Sasuke was preparing to have. Orochimaru only needed to wait until Kabuto was occupied, which he was now, once his physical abilities had sufficiently declined. This was the best chance he would ever have. With his tomo spinning, he entered Orochimaru's room and turned on his Sharingan to examine it. No seals were being used as traps because there was no chakra emanating from the doorway. In any case, he hadn't anticipated finding any. Only in novels and films were all of the hideout's doors imprisoned. Yes, it was an extremely safe place. They didn't only make things more difficult for intruders, though, and it was also a huge waste of resources. Orochimaru chose the more sensible course instead. Only a few extremely sensitive areas on the inside of the base were treated similarly, leaving the rest of the base trapped. Sasuke opened the door without any more hesitation. He looked around the room, focusing on the doorframe and his Sharingan whirled. However, there were no abrupt movements or mechanical clicks. Nor had Orochimaru used ordinary means to trap the door. There was nothing but the Sannin himself, sitting in bed, staring at his former apprentice with a detached expression. "Sasuke, I was wondering when you'd come here." The Uchiha refused to back down, raising his slowly revolving gaze to meet Orochimaru's. "You were expecting me?" Ku. You're not as hard to predict as you might think. I was unable to defeat Naruto. Unable to defeat him Sasuke-kun? You were unable to put up a fight. Sasuke's eyes narrowed a little, and the quick spin of the 3 tomo in each eye suggested that he was suddenly furious. Sasuke started to advance, cautiously making his way to the bed, saying, "Your training hasn't produced the results I'd hoped for. We both trained under a Sannin for a similar amount of time, yet Naruto managed to emerge the stronger." Naruto began it the stronger. "You're holding back on me." "What do you mean, Sasuke-kun? You never intended for me to reach your level, never wanted me to be powerful enough to beat Itachi. You just wanted to keep me here, and manipulate me to your own ends." "Ah, it seems like someone was listening to Naruto-kun earlier after all." He raised some interesting points. He always has been a rather intriguing individual. For civilians, that would have simply meant he would be going his own way. I've decided that he was right, about you at least. You have no desire in pushing me, in preparing me to face Itachi. I am done with you. However, such farewells were rarely that straightforward or amicable among shinobi. Particularly when they were between two people with such drastically different goals, and especially when they were between nuke.nin. As a result, Orochimaru was not at all shocked when Sasuke quickly pulled out his Chikudo, which was a substitute for the one Naruto had broken, and aimed it at him. As it flew in the direction of the bedridden Sannin, the Chidori's lightning chakra protruded from the blade like a lance. As Sasuke grinned at the weak defense, Orochimaru's arms lifted and crossed in front of his face. Or maybe not. Because Sasuke experienced an abrupt resistance as soon as the lightning chakra struck Orochimaru's skin. Even as it fixed Orochimaru's wrists, his attack's momentum gradually slowed until the tip of the attack stopped just a few inches away from the Sannin's unblinking stare. Come now, Sasuke-kun. Did you really expect me to be defeated so easily? With a slight narrowing of his eyes, Sasuke said, that shouldn't be possible. Orochimaru let his face display emotion for the first time, and the smile that spread across it was purely predatory. You should have listened to Naruto-kun more carefully. Even I heard him mention that I was not teaching you all I knew. You should have listened to me more carefully too. I told you that you were predictable, enough for you to figure out that I'd anticipate your defection. Are you truly foolish enough to think I'd have allowed it if I wasn't able to stop you? His skin appeared to slough strangely even as he spoke, and his mouth opened unnaturally wide. Sasuke had witnessed this before and was fully expecting another Orochimaru to appear. This time, the body was healed from the wrist punctures and ready to battle. He had no idea that a giant white snake would suddenly appear, carelessly throwing away its human skin as if it were trash. The truth is, I lured you here. The 3 severed pieces of Orochimaru's snake form splattered wetly onto the ground right after, but Sasuke's ever-present smirk remained unwavering as he abruptly vanished from view. Sasuke mumbled, a trap? Path. The word died as his throat froze. To his increasing dismay, he discovered that he was totally paralyzed and could not move any part of his body. What was left of Orochimaru lunged forward after he said, this body, my true form, is designed to immobilize targets. Its blood turns into a paralyzing agent on contact with the air, and the head doesn't die. They shifted the scene of their battle to their minds as his jaws closed around the Uchiha, swallowing him whole. The door to Orochimaru's room opened after a few minutes. Outside, Kabuto watched with the slightest trace of fear as Uchiha Sasuke's form appeared in the room. Which one are you? A smirk appeared on the face of the person in front of the medic, and he felt his heart sink. It was the same one he had witnessed Uchiha Sasuke use numerous times in the previous 2 years. Which one do you think? Sasuke asked, his grin even growing as he left, with Kabuto appearing too stunned to intervene. And as he left, his thoughts were racing. Though weakened, Orochimaru was not nearly as much as he had believed. He had been duped into falling into a trap, but he had made it out alive. He had entered a battleground set up by one of Konoha's most formidable Nuke.Nin and triumphed. Additionally, he should be able to defeat Konoha's most dangerous Nuke.Nin with the team he had in mind. For the first time in years, the Arikis were able to spend a significant amount of time in Kumogakure during the course of a few months. They did go on missions. There were missions where the two went alone, missions where they went together, and missions with slightly bigger teams that occasionally split them up. However, in general, the missions were shorter and allowed the Arikis to remain relatively close to home because the Raikage was gracious enough to give them time there, which had been far too infrequent for them in recent years. As the year went on through October, the weather in the mountains also cooled off. Yugito's own 16th birthday was approaching on the last day of the month, and Naruto's 16th birthday fell on the 10th. Naturally, this meant one thing. The couple had been able to spend a lot of time at home, but that didn't mean they weren't busy because they were busy getting ready for their wedding. It was a unique chance for Naruto to witness Yugito acting, well, girly. It was not a word that was frequently used to characterize her. Yes, she was very proud of her hair, putting it in its traditional ponytail after brushing it to a shine each morning when she had time. Other than that, though, she was always not afraid to voice her opinions and had a tendency to be a little bold and aggressive. Naruto wouldn't have it any other way, but those were characteristics that weren't exactly ladylike. But now that they were in the middle of organizing their wedding, Yugito was behaving more ecstatically than he had ever seen her. Naturally, it was a little deceptive to claim that they were organizing a wedding. In all honesty, it was more like Naruto nodding while his future bride talked endlessly about how to tailor the wedding to the couple's needs. He had discovered early on that it was not a good idea to argue with her about it. Furthermore, the two had to worry about more than just missions themselves. With his 16th birthday, Naruto had reached adulthood in the shinobi community. Together with his ancestry, it also meant that the Araki clan should be formally established among Kumogakure's clans and other things. And that brought with it its own paperwork nightmare. Everything from the clan's rights and privileges in the village to something as trivial as formalizing the clan crest had to be established. They were both exhausted overall. Yugito handled the majority of the wedding preparations, while Naruto handled the majority of the paperwork and meetings pertaining to the Araki clan's formalization. The actual wedding was held on November 1st, just one day after Yugito turned 16. The couple chose to have the ceremony outside rather than in one of the buildings that are frequently used for weddings in the village of Kumogakure. They had discovered a semicircle of open space in the middle of a wooded mountainside, with a stunning view of the surrounding mountains from one half of the clearing that ended in a sheer drop. However, a ring of seals charged with fiery chakra was sufficient to keep the bite at bay and make the clearing comfortable despite the chill of winter in those northern mountains. Political factors influenced attendance at the event nearly as much as interpersonal connections and relationships. Although the Arikis had invited everyone they wanted to attend, many dignitaries from Kumogakure and the nation it represented were also present because the couple would soon become an official clan. The retired Yondaime Raikage, who had a significant impact on both Yugito and Naruto's lives, conducted the ceremony. He stood facing away from a brilliant sun that filtered through the ragged peaks that could be seen beyond the drop's edge. The guests of honor of the Arikis were standing in front of him. Many of the same individuals had played significant roles in both the couple's lives since they had known and been close since they were young. As a result, they had chosen honored guests together, including Kurabi, Mitoku, Jiraiya, Akana, and a few other childhood friends and teachers, in place of the more conventional bridesmaids and groomsmen. Clad in a black kimono bearing the emblems of his long, standing bloodline, Naruto stood before all of the guests gathered. Additionally, he was noticeably anxious, which was not a feeling he experienced very often. He never found combat to be too stressful. He had spent his entire life training for it. It was his calling. After all, anything could become commonplace with enough exposure. However, as he stood before his gathered guests, his heart thumping in his chest, he watched Yugito start to walk down the aisle towards him. Nothing he had ever experienced had prepared him for this. The edges of her white kimono were also embroidered with the symbols that their ancestors had left on their skin. Soon after, she and he were standing together at the head of the aisle, as they would be for the rest of their lives. For him, the remainder of the ceremony seemed to pass in a blur. He vaguely remembered taking vows with Yugito, as though he had heard the former Raikage conduct the ceremony from a distance. As was customary, he took a sip of ceremonial sake. A passionate, soul-searing kiss then sealed the ceremony. Then, finally, they were married. The ceremony was almost immediately followed by a reception for the Arikis. The chairs that had been used for the ceremony were arranged around the tables, which had been swiftly assembled after being unsealed from storage scrolls. More scrolls were used to obtain the food. Depending on the dish's needs, one is slightly modified to keep the food hot or cold and fresh. In fact, Jiraiya, possibly the most traveled man in all the elemental nations, had prepared the menu. Additionally, he had been planning the delivery of the ingredients to Kumo for the majority of the previous month. Fruit from Ho no Kuni, seafood from Mizu no Kuni, beef from Tsuchi no Kuni, and herbs from Kusa no Kuni. The magnificent repast was devoured by everyone in attendance. After that, there was dancing and a band that Kurabi, of all people, had suggested. It goes without saying that everyone was flatly rejected until they were also examined by another person. The honor went to Akana. She had been pleasantly surprised to discover that they were actually very good. It appeared that he had good taste in music despite his borderline ineptitude on the subject. Who would have thought? The band's style combined elements of modern rock with classical music, and they were instrumentalists. Note: for those of you who have already heard them, I'm picturing something akin to the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, albeit obviously without the Christmas music. As the first notes were played, Naruto reached out to Yugito and spun her around on the dance floor. As they began the first dance of the evening, his arms found her waist and hers his shoulders. Not that anyone would have noticed, but neither of them was very accustomed to dancing. They were accustomed to taijutsu, which at its best can resemble any kind of elegant dance. And because they had trained in the same techniques for many years, their movements blended together to create an amazing show. As they danced, Yugito let her body fit snugly into Naruto's. And as they went up the stairs, one hand raised, allowing the 2 rings on her finger to sparkle in the starlight. Her engagement ring was securely fastened to her finger, just below the more recent wedding ring. Without even waiting to hear her answer, Naruto chuckled a little and smiled softly in the low light. Looking at the rings again, he asked, "When I gave you that first one, I think it's the only time I've ever truly surprised you." The urge to give him a playful slap on the back of the head was repressed as she arched an eyebrow and gave him an imperious look. But the expression was short-lived, as a satisfied smile quickly spread across her face. "Well, you always used to be so clueless when it came to romance. I even had to tell you we were going to start dating instead of waiting to be asked." A more lively song began to strumming through the air as more couples started to emerge onto the dance floor, and Naruto let out another quiet laugh. "Well, I could hardly stay like that forever. And besides, the setting was just perfect." Yugito sighed softly, unable to argue with the sentiment. They had been traveling along the border of Taki no Kuni and Tsuchi for a little more than a year after leaving Kumo. Many of the biggest and most spectacular waterfalls in the elemental nations can be found in that region, which was where the vast river system of Taki no Kuni met the towering mountains of Tsuchi no Kuni. And it was one of the most breathtaking sights she had ever seen in the evening, at sunset. Particularly when Naruto was kneeling in front of her, and Jiraiya didn't even make a single inappropriate comment. It had helped that he had sat down in Jiraiya earlier that day and was certain of how well behaved he would be later that night after hearing some important news. Despite himself, Naruto couldn't help but smile, saying, "He can behave when he realizes the situation calls for it, I suppose." However, Yugito didn't actually need to be aware of that. As the evening went on, Yugito and Naruto were having a great time while other couples danced all over the dance floor. While the former Raikage, their old sensei, watched the two with amusement, Akana appeared to take special pleasure in dragging the current Raikage out onto the dance floor. Her old genin teammate appeared noticeably uneasy about the idea of dancing. Mitoku was out on the dance floor, which Naruto hadn't anticipated from his stoic teammate. Unfortunately, Mitoku was surrounded by visiting dignitaries and preoccupied with numerous other small ceremonies throughout the night, which kept him from approaching to inquire about his partner. Eventually, though, it was time for them to leave. Not exactly a honeymoon. With the exception of missions, international events, and other similarly significant occasions, elite shinobi hardly ever left the village for an extended length of time. They were just too valuable a resource, and you never knew when you might need their skills. So maybe a better word to describe it would be retreat. At the speed an average shinobi could achieve on the road, their destination was likely only a half-day's drive from Kumogakure. The location itself was one of several hot spring resorts scattered throughout the mountainous landscape. Gamabunta insisted on the honor, so they left the reception on top of him. The fact that Jiraiya wouldn't dare attempt to follow him following the training trip fiasco didn't hurt his case either. After the old toad landed outside the resort, Naruto touched his chakra and used it to assist in a controlled slide down the side of Bunta's leg to the ground. He would have acted like a gentleman and assisted Yugito in getting down, but such behavior was much more appropriate for carriages and horses than for giant toads that dwarfed both men and women. Furthermore, she frequently favored doing such tasks herself, he thought as she followed a similar path to the ground. When she was low enough, he did reach out and take her hand, swinging her gently to the ground next to him. He then opened a large barrel of the premium sake that had been served at the wedding, took out a scroll from inside his kimono, and opened it. He pointed absently to the barrel and said, "Thanks for the lift, Bunta. I managed to sneak this out of the storeroom for you, your favorite vintage if I remember correctly." With a startlingly quick flick of his tongue, the toad boss flipped the barrel's lid off, and then his thunderous voice echoed through the room. "Oh, my thanks. And I'd be honored to share a drink with the newlywed couple before my departure." With a soft laugh, Yugito rolled her eyes and said, "Sometimes I just think all these shared drink requests are excuses for you to drink more." Naruto simply shook his head regretfully as he took the barrel. "Huh, when you're as old as I am you always look for those opportunities," he said. He had no dish of any kind, so he just scooped out a double handful of the clear liquid. He told Yugito that, and Gamabunta used his tongue to pick up the barrel and pour some of it down his throat before placing what was left on his head. "Oh, that's the stuff. Congratulations again, you two. Enjoy life as long as you can." The Toad Boss vanished with a massive puff of smoke. Yugito felt Naruto come up behind her and sweep her up bridal style into his arms before the smoke had even cleared. She would have objected, but she had to concede that it was kind of appropriate for tonight. She was carried into the resort in this way, and after a brief verbal exchange between Naruto and the receptionist, the couple was given the key to their suite. Yugito wrapped her arms around Naruto's neck and reached back as he carried her down the hall. "You know, I'm wearing this thing according to tradition." She could tell by the faint sparkle in Naruto's eyes that he was aware that, in accordance with custom, donning a kimono simply meant donning one. "If I recall correctly, our room has a private, adjoining onsen." A thrill went through Yugito from head to toe as he slightly changed his grip. I'm sure that room has plenty of interesting features." Neither of them cared that the night would be long. Sasori, meanwhile, waited in a wooded clearing on a mountainside about 5 miles from the wedding location. He detested having to wait. He would need to do a little more work on the seals he used to make his sleeper agents. However, he needed to focus on more significant tasks for the foreseeable future. It wouldn't do to keep anyone else waiting, after all. Before they came, he heard the faintest rustle of leaves. He had just released the seals of 2 sleeper agents. Since their return, the Arikis had sent a Chunin and a Junin of Kumogakure on missions. The present meeting place had been determined by the fact that one of them had even been invited to the wedding. "What have you learned?" The Junin was the first shinobi to speak. The Arikis grew much stronger during their training mission. They were promoted to Junin soon after their return, and the Raikage appears to count them among his elite Junin. "I have witnessed them utilizing Kurabi's Kenjutsu style on missions, and they appear to be able to better utilize their Kekkei Genkei. It has also been rumored that they learned of Fuinjutsu, though I have been unable to confirm if it's true. Can they exert control over Biju? It's rumored that one of the reasons Kurabi was sent to help train them was so they could practice that ability. But the rumors are unconfirmed, as is the ability. And you, what can you tell me of the Hachibi?" Kurabi is the Raikage's brother and Kumo's greatest swordsmaster. He primarily uses Tai and Kenjutsu in battle, and his Kenjutsu style utilizes 7 swords. Against more powerful opponents, he calls upon the Hachibi's chakra and is said to be able to harness its full power while remaining in control of his actions. He has trained 4 shinobi, all currently holding the rank of Junin. Karui and Omoi were trained by him before the Raikage assigned the Arikis to him. The training trip with the Arikis was his only known extended absence, and he is once more residing at Unraikyo. Where is Unraikyo? All I've been able to learn so far is that it is near Kumogakure. I'm sorry, but that's all I know about it too. Its location is a closely guarded secret, known only by his students and a handful of shinobi used as messengers and sentries by the Raikage. Your failure to find this information is disturbing. I am sorry, Sasori. Sama, for. Before the startled shinobi could respond, a steel bladed tail sprang out from under Sasori's cloak and stabbed him in the heart, interrupting the man's speech. His seals also had the drawback of requiring total obedience. The seal would be weakened if someone failed to finish a task that Sasori instructed them to do for whatever reason. Sasori also wouldn't take the chance of it shattering. Sasori wanted to enhance this aspect of his seals as well because the human mind was so challenging to control. With his gaze still on Sasori, the other agent appeared unfazed by the unexpected assault. The puppeteer looked up at him. "You are dismissed." The shinobi vanished from sight almost immediately, returning to Kumogakure to carry out Sasori's orders. Only after he had left did a shadow separate from the clearing's edge, revealing Deidara advancing into sight. Are you done playing with your toys?" Sasori turned and glared at his overly sentimental partner. "My business here is finished, yes. Then it's time to go to Suna, yeah. Test my art against the Ichibi. I would be more careful if I were you. He is quite formidable, and the desert is his domain." Huh, my artistic perfection loses to no one, yeah. Maybe Sasori would have sighed at that remark if he were human. Art had never made sense to the young idiot, and it most likely never would. The two frequently argued, and it was a pointless argument because neither of them seemed to be able to persuade the other to agree with them. Sasori was not in the mood for it right now, to be honest. Instead, he turned and started to move in Suna's direction. Come, it would not do to keep them waiting. The newlyweds enjoyed their getaway at the hot springs for a few days. Relaxing soaks, delectable meals, leisurely hikes through the mountainous terrain, and undoubtedly many private trysts made the time spent there enjoyable. By any standard, it was an amazing experience. However, as with everything, it ended quickly. Additionally, the couple checked out of the resort somewhat reluctantly. However, they were professionals, shinobi above all else, and they weren't going to be too bothered by something so trivial. The return trip to Kumo began fairly slowly. However, the two blondes' competitive nature and desire to work out eventually took center stage. Chakra. Enhanced leaps across the rugged terrain, a slight quickening of pace, a victorious smile as one purposefully interrupted the other as they turned a corner, and before long, the couple was racing across the mountains with Shite no 2. Rimu blazing on their limbs. And any reluctance they had to leave the onsen soon enough was banished by the sensation and excitement of the wind in their faces and the cool mountain air. They arrived at the village gates as the sun was sinking into the evening sky, and they obviously made excellent time. In actuality, Yugito arrived first, landing just a split second before Naruto in front of the checkpoint. However, as her smug smile demonstrated, both seasoned shinobi could have easily noticed that brief moment, and she was fully aware of her small victory. Since their return to the village those months ago, it had become rather normal for them to be waved past the gates without even a second look. The couple decided to get dinner as soon as they arrived in the actual village, and Yugito reluctantly accepted Naruto's recommendation for the best ramen stand in the area. Coincidentally, only a portion of Naruto's decision was responsible for the significant increase in business that followed. They returned to their compound to drop off their bags after eating, and, after thinking for a moment about going back out into the village, decided to stay inside and wash the dirt and dust of their journey away before sleeping for the rest of the night. The doorbell of the manor woke them as the sun rose. It didn't take Yugito long to decide that Naruto would be the one to get out of bed and answer the door. When he opened the door, he was understandably sleepy, but he was instantly awakened when he saw that an Anbu was standing there. Trouble. An investigation. Raikage-san. One of the village's Junin was reported missing and his corpse discovered. That sounds like a job for the Anbu, or Hunter.nin perhaps. What are we needed for? The trail has gone cold. Raikage. Sama is hoping that your enhanced senses might be able to find something that everybody else has missed. And you're supposed to guide us to the scene, I assume? Yes. Give me a few minutes then. I need to tell Yugito-chan and we'll have to get our gear together. Of course, I'll wait here. The couple quickly got ready, which is uncommon for experienced shinobi. In the world of ninjas, time was a luxury, and one never knew when they would run out. One rapidly learned how to take advantage of every opportunity when a single second could mean the difference between life and death. Within 5 minutes, they were on the road with their Anbu guide, sprinting back across the same terrain they had only been on the day before. Although there was less distance to cover, the pace wasn't as fast as the Arikis on their way back to the village. And by the time they reached their destination, it was getting close to noon. There were 2 Anbu squads nearby, protecting the Raikage and securing the clearing. As the Arikis got closer, the burly man turned and said, "Takahashi Kanai." Beg pardon. The Arikis saw the corpse of the dead shinobi for the first time when the Raikage moved aside. "Takahashi Kanai, my murdered shinobi." His rumbling voice carried a hint of simmering rage. He was promoted 6 months before your return at the age of 19. Not on your level perhaps, but a promising shinobi nonetheless. Or at least he was. Pointing to the vicious wound on the deceased man's chest, he gestured the couple closer. He was killed by a single stab to the chest. The blade was driven straight through the sternum into the heart. It was a poisoned blade, not that it made any difference. What poison was on the blade? It must provide some clue. The medic.nin have never seen anything like it. They can't even figure out the ingredients. As much as we've tried, we haven't found the slightest clue as to who killer was, where he's from, or where he went. Hopefully you'll have more luck. After a brief glance, Yugito and Naruto limbed their bodies with the sheen of a Shiki no 2. Rimu. They both winced, and as soon as they did, they both recoiled visibly. The Raikage's face contorted into a puzzled and interested one. What is it? Yugito took a step back, allowing her Kekai Genkai to diminish. That poison. It stinks something awful. I can't smell a thing. Naruto was making a leisurely circle around the edge of the clearing when he said, if you had our bloodline you could. He pulled up short, gesturing to the east and south, saying, it seems to be able to linger quite strongly, we'll be able to track him. Whoever did this, went that way. A smile of ferocious victory appeared on the Raikage's face. You can track him. Can you catch him? Hard to say without knowing anything about how he travels, but with Shite no to. Rimu, I'd bet the answer is yes. The two nodded once and left. Do it. I want the bastard's head. Yugito and Naruto essentially flew over the terrain. The trail was nearly absurdly simple to follow because of their keen sense of smell, which made it impossible for them to miss any strong poison the assassin used. Additionally, they were able to eat up the ground at an incredible rate because Shite no to Rimu were active. By the time they set up camp for the night, they had followed the trail to the south and west and, despite their late start, were almost in the border countries between their homeland and Ho no Kuni. They traveled through Ho no Kuni and into Kawa no Kuni for 2 more days. And they eventually came to an end of their chase as they were getting closer to the Kase no Kuni border with that nation. By a narrow margin, Naruto was the first to notice. He landed in a crouch in a forest clearing, and Yugito landed next to him almost immediately. Before Naruto spoke, they were silent for a few seconds, taking in the information they had gleaned from their acute senses. You smell it too? Yeah, the poison, a lot of it, and dust too, a mile or so to the south. Think we should check it out? I don't see any point in following a trail when we already know where it leads. Seeing that, Naruto grinned and said, logic like that is hard to argue against. As the two headed south, Naruto took the lead, and the smell of the poison seemed to get stronger and stronger. Finally, they arrived at a slit in the trees where the overpowering odor filled the air. They were standing close to the edge of a small canyon, which was presumably carved by the river they could hear flowing below them, according to a quick survey of the area. Yes, and a significant portion of the cliff on this side of the gully had disappeared. In order to give himself a break from the odor, Naruto deactivated a Shiki no 2. Rimu and strode to the crater's edge, his features contorted in disgust. No doubt about it, there's a lot of that poison down there. Yugito joined him, glaring down at the debris that made up the floor of the crater. It doesn't look very stable. I don't think we're going to be able to dig down in order to figure out what happened. Even if we could, some of the river water has to be washing through all those rocks. It would be damaging what little evidence the cave.in left. So in other words, you don't think we're going to be able to figure out what happened here? No, Naruto let out a sigh, clearly frustrated. Trying to pick up his trail here is going to be difficult. All the other poison here is going to wash out his trail for some distance. That's true, or we could follow this trail. What trail? Naruto asked abruptly as he turned to face her. Yugito responded by jumping over the canyon's edge and landing on one of the numerous logs that appeared to stretch across its width. 2 women, both of whom seemed to be medics. One of the scents is pretty familiar, but I can't quite place it. Naruto also jumped down, reactivating his Ashiki no 2. Rimu and landing in a crouch next to her. You're right. It's a bit difficult to pick up, but definitely there. In response, Yugito simply rolled her eyes and bounded off to pursue the new path. They soon discovered that they needed to move much more slowly because the scent they were pursuing was much weaker than it had been. Of course I'm right. Additionally, it was fragmented because their quarry's frequent leaps from log to log caused sporadic contact with solid surfaces. The two, however, were unrelenting. They soon found it much easier to follow the trail across solid ground as they entered a wooded area. Like wraiths, they moved swiftly and soundlessly along the trail, scuttling through the woods. As they moved, the couple exchanged subtle glances with one another. Then there was a sudden clamor of smoke and frantic movement in the forest. There were 6 figures arranged beneath the canopy when everything had finally calmed down. The 4 newcomers had obviously failed in their attempt to get the drop on the Arikis. Only halfway up toward the 2 Kumo.nin were their kunai lifted from their sheaths. In contrast, Naruto held a sword in both hands, with the tip of his other blade positioned at the base of the other attacker's skull and the razor edge of his left blade resting against the attacker's throat. Similar circumstances befell the 2 who had pursued Yugito. One was staring at the blade point, which was only millimeters away from his right eye, while the other had a blade ready to slide between his ribs. However, after seeing the unexpected visitors, Yugito and Naruto both became a little more at ease. The 4 operatives sagged visibly in relief as Yugito followed Naruto in straightening up and removing both of his blades from the Suna Anbu. We didn't expect to encounter any Suna Anbu on this side of the border. We didn't expect any Kumo.nin on this side of the continent. Naruto smiled, finding the remark amusing. The majority of shinobi would have been too shaken to think of a reasonably clever retort. A good point. We're tracking a supposed criminal who killed one of Kumo's Junin. He seemed to have been involved in quite the fight back by the river. We lost his trail at the battlefield, but picked up the trail of 2 women that we've been following to this point. Even though their faces were hidden by the Anbu masks, the 2 seasoned Kumo.nin could tell a lot from the way the Anbu operatives tensed and looked at one another. As a result, their response, at least the first part of it, hardly surprised them. We're pretty sure we're here for the same reason. If you're talking about who we think you are, he helped facilitate an attack the Cage. All the way out here? No. The Cage fought an opponent wielding explosive clay back in Sanagakure. He was defeated, and after leaving a trap that slowed our pursuit, his assailants brought him here. Naruto's voice was tinged with shock, astonishment, and disbelief as he said, Gaara lost, in the middle of the desert? The ANBU's tone was clipped, displaying a hint of anger at the apparent skepticism about his lord's abilities. His assailant assaulted the village itself, Cage. Sama taxed himself to defend it, which is the only thing that allowed him to be defeated. In a cool, collected tone, Yugito said, how he was defeated was irrelevant. What matters now is how Gaara is faring. The Anbu members' posture amply demonstrated their anxiety and uncertainty, and the impact of those words was both immediate and evident. Shio. Sama is tending to him, his condition is severe. Yugito and Naruto glanced at each other. Take us there. Those words seemed to positively irritate the Anbu. 2 foreign shinobi wanting to be brought to our badly wounded Cage, that seems quite suspicious. Naruto shrugged, but his tone was steely despite his informal demeanor. If we wished your village harm, our blades would not have been held a few seconds back. Despite their experience as seasoned shinobi, the Anbu could not help but shudder at the unsubtle thread. And if the Arikis had truly wanted them dead, they couldn't help but wonder how soon the fight would have ended. Follow us. The Arikis were quickly led by the Anbu to a sizable contingent of Suna.nin. The shinobi manning the group's perimeter, Anbu escort or not, didn't appear to be thrilled about the prospect of allowing 2 Kumo.nin to get close. Expectantly, one of the Anbu at the perimeter pointed at the Arikis and said, You 2, do not come any closer. And you, he said, looking at the 4 Suna Anbu that had brought Yugito and Naruto here, what are you thinking? Bringing foreign shinobi here. As Kankuro spoke from his position directly behind the man, the haughty Anbu jumped in evident surprise, and neither Yugito nor Naruto bothered to hide their amused grins. Do you even know who you're talking to? One of the 4-man Anbu patrols we had securing the area, Kankuro.san, and the 2 Kumo.nin they lead here in a gross breach of security. Those 2 Kumo.nin are Araiki Naruto and Araiki Yugito, Gaara's friends. Before the Anbu found his voice again, there was silence for a few deliciously awkward sentences. These 2 are the Arikis? Kankuro turned to face the 2 blondes and said, Yes, and Gaara would appreciate it if they were treated respectfully. I'll take you to see him. Thanks, said Yugito and Naruto as they advanced to pull Kankuro astride as he made his way to the middle of the crowd. It was more of a statement than a query. Gaara was attacked. Yes, by Akatsuki. One of them, Deidara according to the bingo book, infiltrated Sanagakure and attacked him. Gaara engaged him in aerial combat, which prevented anyone else from helping him. Deidara captured Gaara, and took him out of the village. I, after some hesitation, foolishly went after him on my own. When I caught up the second Akatsuki member, Akasuna no Sasori, defeated me easily. Naruto gave his chin a contemplative rub. Akasuna no Sasori, I think I've heard that name before. Kankuro led them past the final screen of spectators, and the Cage appeared. It wouldn't surprise me. He sounded as exhausted as Gaara did, with a hoarse, weak voice. Naruto was unable to detect any marks on him in spite of this. And a few other noteworthy things caught his attention. The small, mysteriously shrouded body nearby. Additionally, Kakashi, Sakura, Sai, Lee, Neji, Tenten, and Guy were present. He is a Nuke.nin from my village, possibly the most accomplished puppet user in the history of the elemental nations. After exchanging a brief look, Yugito spoke up to Naruto. So he makes frequent use of poison? Sakura sighed. A very potent poison, even with Tsunade. Sama's teachings I was barely able to save Kankuro from it. And with Kankuro's defeat Akatsuki had enough time to extract Shikaku from me. Both Kumo.nin were stunned and silent for a beat. Naruto's expression abruptly changed to a contemplative frown. Well, unless the ritual is specifically designed not to. But I don't see why Akatsuki would do that. I thought that extracting a biju from its host was fatal. Gaara grimaced a little and went silent for a few seconds before continuing. It did kill me, but one of my retired shinobi, Shio, had developed a forbidden jutsu that was able to resurrect me at the cost of her own life. Why are the two of you this far from Kumogakure? Tracking Sasori, it seems. A Kumo shinobi was killed in the mountains outside of the village. When Yugito Shan and I used a Shiki no to Rimu to examine the scene, we could smell the poison despite the time that had passed, one of the strongest scents I've ever encountered. We followed it to some sort of cave.in not far from here. That must have been quite some battle. And there was enough of the poison hanging in the air to make it impossible to pick up the trail again. But we did sense the chakra of all the shinobi gathered here, and investigated. He looked up at the various Konoha.nin. Why are you guys here? Yosh. Konoha received a. Someone other than Guy explain please. Kakashi sat up a little, and he sounded as exhausted as he appeared. Suna sent Konoha a coded letter by Messenger Hawk requesting aid after Gaara was captured. The seven of us tracked Akatsuki to the cave you mentioned. Guy's team took care of the security measures while my team confronted Akatsuki with Chio's help. Sakura and Chio fought Sasori there, while Sai and I got Gaara's body back from Deidara. Then Chio and Sakura arrived, at about the same time as the Suna task force here. And the Akatsuki members escaped, both of them. Kankuro made that statement with a hint of dissatisfaction. Naruto let out a sigh. They murdered a Kumo shinobi, attacked the Kazekage in his home village, and killed him by extracting his biju. It would seem that Akatsuki is once more on the move. After a few moments of silence during which everyone processed that unwanted bit of logic, Gaara finally broke the ice. What does that mean? Yugito looked back toward the collapsed cavern and grimaced. Nothing good. He was unable to recall the last time he had been pushed this far. He had used twice as many tricks and a dozen different jutsus. His body was filled with a carefully regulated amount of natural energy, and even now Ma and Pa sat on his shoulders as some of the strongest summons the Toad Clan could boast of had been called to the field. He had gone all out, with nothing held back. It hadn't been sufficient either. He was worn out, and his chakra reserves were nearly depleted despite the strength he had extracted from nature. He felt the growing toll of multiple internal injuries. His body ached from the beating he'd taken, and his muscles ached from exertion. He had run out of options and was at his breaking point. He had lost the most significant battle of his life. Around the toiling sage, 6 sets of eyes stood in a circle, staring at him blankly. All supplying the man who would be a god with information. You are too old, sensei. You cannot defeat me, cannot recognize what I've become, cannot accept what must be done in this world. You're a relic of older times, the world has passed you by. Leaning himself back into an upright position, Jiraiya let out a small groan as he felt the sharp grating of broken bones. The pain was unbearable, and the last semblance of consciousness he held on to nearly vanished. But not just yet, he couldn't let go. Naruto, Konoha, and Yugito needed to know what they were up against. My vision's not so bad that I can't see a deluded fool for what he is. His next move didn't turn out as well as he had hoped. Normally, he would have dove into the surrounding water. However, his ankle was about to give out, so he just keeled sideways into it and relied on the 2 older toads to push him as fast and as deeply as they could. However, the move was effective, and the 6 paths of pain followed him, cutting through the water with near ease. The problem was that they couldn't dive as quickly as a ninja could surface. Every ninja eventually learned how to water walk and understood that water would be repelled if they focused too much chakra on their feet. When that fundamental lesson was applied incorrectly, Jiraiya shot back up from the abyss like a cork emerging from a bottle. Rocketing past the surface in a spray of water, he was past all 6 pains before they could respond to his presence. His actions were already being imitated by Ma and Pa, who were dripping oil from their mouths and heavily covering the small lake's surface. And the surface burst into a sudden conflagration when his Gukakyu no Jutsu struck it. As all 6 of Pain's paths lost sight of his former sensei, Nagato watched without emotion. None of the bodies were seriously threatened by the flaming mixture. However, it did create a terrible mirror on the water's surface. The water's smooth surface was broken by a pulse from the Diva Path, which dispersed spray on burning oil throughout the region. It should come as no surprise that Jiraiya was absent. For a ninja of his level, the distraction had been more than sufficient to make him vanish. He had even been able to conceal himself from the rain by finding cover above. The Sage of Toad was running away. In any case, God's wrath was unavoidable. Gazing at the kanji etched on the elder toad's back, Jiraiya exhaled sharply as he released the technique, the light vanishing from his finger. "Sorry about this, Pa." After examining the sage's face, the toad turned and said, "Don't worry, I know how important this is." Jiraiya may have witnessed Pa features soften for the first time, with worry and concern beginning to seep into their edges. "Are you sure about this? You might still be able to get out of here and deliver that message yourself." No, as Jiraiya's thoughts strayed back through his past, his eyes closed. Numerous times, he had failed. He had failed to stop Orochimaru from leaving and had failed to win Tsunade's affections. After training Minato to become one of the best shinobi in the world, he lost him at a time when he shouldn't have been apart from him. And when Minato died, he simply couldn't bring himself to be there for his godson, so the boy was taken to Kumogakure. He had failed to stop the snake from killing Sarutobi Sensei or stop Orochimaru from attacking Konoha. Even though he boasted about being strong, successful, and feared, his life was nothing more than a long list of failures. Then everything changed. He had succeeded in reviving Tsunade to take on the role of Hokage. In the end, he had been there for Naruto when he needed him. Additionally, he had molded the boy and his girlfriend into a force that he was certain would thwart Akatsuki's schemes. After meeting the little brat, Naruto realized that everything had changed. The child's greatest strength was his ability to improve everyone around him. Even at such a late age, he had accomplished the same feat with the gallant Jiraiya. The child was undoubtedly unique. Ultimately, he had accomplished the most significant task. Imparting his knowledge to the following generation, he had ensured that they could complete the task he had begun. All he needed to do now was make sure they knew enough to do it. "I have to finish this," the gallant Jiraiya's last great accomplishment. "All right, kid, if you're sure." Before Jiraiya could reply, Ma's heavy, solemn voice interrupted. "One of them's nearby, with the crooked nose piercing." "Then this is it." Jiraiya's expression darkened. The moment had come. He extended his hand, allowing the natural energy surrounding him to flow through his body. He brought it in a lot faster than he would normally. He could already sense the changes in his skin and the calcification of his joints. He would have previously been concerned about the long-term harm this was causing, which even Tsunade couldn't reverse. However, he had moved past that worry. As he closed in on his target, he quickly threw himself from his hiding place, eschewing all of the formidable stealth skills he had developed over the years. No matter how much you steeled yourself, you were never ready for the shock of a blade severing your heart in two. He was not at all shocked when he saw Human Path spin to face him and raise its arm as a black blade appeared in its hand. A wound that was unquestionably fatal. But pain had misjudged him, and he had already come to terms with his death. Despite his wounds and exhaustion, he was able to remove one path by himself. With hardly a thought, the Udama Rasengan formed in his outstretched hand, almost making it seem effortless due to the powerful chakra coursing through him. He clamped his other hand around his attackers, holding them in place while pinning them to the blade, retaining his attacker for a brief period of time. The Rasengan then attacked. The blade tore free of Pain's chest and his path flew. As he fell to the ground in a pool of blood from his ruined chest, he felt pain worse than any he had ever experienced. Before the body even touched the ground, he witnessed Fukasaku land on it, and then the two of them vanished in a burst of ninja smoke. You must leave them with something to remember you by if you want them to do so. Before they had created Chunin, it was the final lesson Hiruzen had given them as their Junin. Sensei. He had taken it seriously and made numerous attempts to live up to it. He had ultimately given Yugito and Naruto everything he had. Ultimately, he had given them the keys that should enable them to solve the mystery of pain. That would have to be sufficient in the end. In spite of, or maybe because of, all of this, the great Toad Sage of Mount Myobokuzen passed away smiling.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.